The last thing the enemy sniper saw was nothing. No muzzle flash, no warning, no sound. One moment he was hunting. The next, he was gone. And the woman who pulled the trigger? Nobody even knew she was there. 3 years, 47 soldiers dead, 0 survivors, 0 evidence. The military called him the Phantom, the ghost that walked through their best units like smoke through a screen door. They sent 12 of their finest hunters into Black Ridge to end it. They never considered that the real weapon wasn't the man with the most medals. It was the quiet woman nobody bothered to look at twice. This is her story, and it will change the way you see silence forever. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like this one, they don't come often. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it hits you the way I think it will, smash that like button. Now let's go into the mountains. The helicopter banked hard left, and Sergeant Evelyn Cross grabbed the cargo strap above her head with one hand and kept her rifle stable with the other. Below, the Black Ridge Mountains swallowed the last of the evening light. Pine trees stretched in every direction like an ocean that had forgotten how to move. At this altitude, the temperature outside was already pushing -14, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself. It just reached inside your jacket and grabbed your lungs. She'd been in cold before, worse than this. But something about Black Ridge felt different. The mountains here had a weight to them, a compressed silence that even the rotors couldn't fully cut through. Evelyn had been in enough bad places to recognize when a landscape was trying to tell you something. This one was saying, "Turn around." 2 minutes out, the crew chief shouted over the intercom. The 12 soldiers inside the Black Hawk adjusted their gear with the mechanical efficiency of people who had done this so many times that the ritual was muscle memory now. Weapons checked. Chest rigs tightened. NVGs shifted into standby position. Nobody made eye contact. That was the tradition on insertion flights. You went inward. You found whatever quiet place lived inside your chest, and you climbed into it. Evelyn did the same, but she also watched. She always watched. Staff Sergeant Dominic Hale was sitting directly across from her, his knee bouncing with a nervous energy he probably didn't realize he was displaying. He had 8 years in, 2 combat deployments, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains below them. He caught her looking, and his knee stopped. "First time in Black Ridge?" he asked. His voice had that specific quality, friendly on the surface, testing underneath. "No," she said. He waited for more. She didn't give it. The man to his left, a comm specialist named Ortega, with a satellite relay unit strapped across his back like a mechanical hunchback, leaned in and whispered something to Hale. Evelyn caught 2 words clearly enough: backup and there. She filed it away, said nothing. The helicopter began its descent. Sergeant First Class Jackson Reed was the last one off the aircraft, which told you everything about how he understood the world. In tactical circles, being last off the bird wasn't cowardice, it was dominance. You watched everyone else move into position first. You evaluated the ground before your boots touched it. Reed had been a designated marksman for 11 years, 3 deployments in mountainous terrain. He'd taken shots at 900 meters in crosswind conditions that most instructors would use as cautionary tales about what not to attempt. His kill record in sanctioned operations was classified at a level that required 2 separate clearances to even know the number existed. He was, by every measurable standard, the best long-range shooter on this team. He looked at Evelyn once, during the post-insertion assembly on the frozen tree line, and his expression carried that specific brand of military indifference that was somehow worse than open hostility. It said, "I've categorized you, and you're not in a category that matters." Commander Nathan Cole stood at the center of the group with a topographic map pulled over his flashlight, the red lens turning everyone's faces into something slightly inhuman. Cole was the kind of commander who made you feel safe and nervous simultaneously. Safe because he radiated a controlled confidence that had been built from real experience. Nervous because you could tell that he'd already decided how this operation was going to go, and he wasn't leaving much room in that mental blueprint for surprises. "Listen up," Cole said, his voice low and flat. "We have a 6-hour insertion window before the weather system from the northwest closes in. Our target is the Harlan mining facility, 4 kilometers northeast of our current position. Intel suggests the Phantom is using the facility as a temporary command post between operations." He tapped the map. Primary objective, capture. Secondary objective, intelligence extraction from the site itself. If capture becomes untenable, he paused exactly 1 second. We adapt. Nobody asked what adapt meant. Everyone knew. Reed, your eyes up on the eastern ridge. Hale, you take point on the approach route. Ortega, I want comms established with Falcon Base before we move 200 meters. Cole's eyes moved across the group and landed on Evelyn with the kind of business-like precision of a man reading a checklist. Cross, you're supporting Reed. Cover the western approach angle until we've established the primary position. Supporting Reed, the phrase sat in the cold air between them. Supporting, as in secondary, as in backup. Reed didn't react, didn't even glance at her, which was its own kind of statement. Questions? Cole asked. Nobody asked any. Then we move. The 4 kilometers should have taken 90 minutes at a careful pace. It took 2 hours and 15 minutes because Evelyn stopped the column 3 times. The first time, she held up a fist, and the whole line froze. She crouched beside a section of trail that cut through a narrow ravine, examining the ground with a small penlight held close to the surface. Hale moved up beside her. What have you got? Boot print, she pointed. Size 11, lug sole, military pattern tread, facing east. Could be old. Edges are sharp. Ice crystals haven't formed in the compression zones yet. This was made in the last 4 hours. Hale studied it. We know he uses that facility as a staging point. His people move through this area. His people move through this area, Evelyn said quietly. This boot was stopped here, standing, facing east, meaning looking back in the direction of the facility. She stood up and looked at the tree line above them. Someone was watching their own back door. Hale didn't respond immediately. Cole, he said into his radio. Cross found sign. Someone was stationary at waypoint Delta 4 oriented toward the facility. Timestamps recent. A pause. Cole's voice came back. Noted. Proceed with heightened caution. They proceeded. The second stop came 40 minutes later when Evelyn noticed the birds. In mountain wilderness in winter, the nocturnal species, primarily owls and certain species of thrush, occupied specific auditory territory. You learn to read the soundscape the way a musician reads sheet music, understanding that every instrument had a place, and silence where there should be sound was as loud as any alarm. The 200-meter stretch of forest ahead of them was completely silent, not naturally silent, artificially silent. Something had pushed the birds out. She relayed this to Cole over the radio. Cole's response, delivered with the careful patience of a commander who was trying not to sound like he was dismissing her. Understood. Weather system might be pushing wildlife behavior. Continue advance. She advanced. But she adjusted her own internal calculations. The third stop happened at the edge of the clearing that held the Harlan mining facility. Evelyn went prone in the tree line and studied the compound through her scope for 11 minutes without speaking. The others waited with varying degrees of patience. Hale crouched nearby, watching her rather than the target, with the expression of a man who was beginning to wonder if his original assessment needed revision. Reed was already on the eastern ridge, his voice coming through the earpiece with clipped, efficient updates about sightlines and thermal readings from his long-range optic. The facility was a collection of 3 main structures: a long processing building that had been stripped of its original industrial equipment years ago, a smaller administrative block connected to it by a covered walkway, and a detached generator shed to the south. A secondary vehicle track entered from the north. Chain-link fencing partially collapsed in 2 sections. Enemy vehicles, 2 trucks and what appeared to be a modified SUV, were parked in a loose cluster near the main building's entrance. Weapons were visible on some of the vehicles, partially. Personal equipment was scattered in the covered walkway area, bags, cases. I'm seeing movement in the main building, Reed reported. Thermal shows at least 6 individuals, possibly more in the western section. My angle doesn't cover the back wall. Radio traffic? Cole asked Ortega. Some. Encrypted, short burst. The pattern's irregular. They're not in an operational rhythm. Cole came up beside Evelyn in the tree line and studied the compound. What do you think? He asked, and the fact that he asked her at all told her he was a better commander than his first impression suggested. Evelyn didn't move her eye from the scope. "There are no signs of a quick exit," she said. "The trucks aren't staged for immediate departure. The equipment in the walkway is laid out like somebody's settling in, not packing up. The vehicles aren't facing out. They're all backed in on the south side near the shed. Which means they're prepared to leave quickly from one specific direction," Cole said. "Which means they know we're not coming from that direction," Evelyn said. "Because someone told them where we'd be coming from." The silence that followed was the kind that meant people were rearranging things in their heads. "That's a serious allegation," Cole said carefully. "It's not an allegation. It's geometry." She finally took her eye off the scope and looked at him directly. "Everything is too settled. They're not afraid of us. The way you behave in a temporary position when you're worried about a raid and the way you behave when someone's given you the opposition's approach route look completely different. This," she gestured with her chin toward the compound, "looks like the second one." Cole studied her for a moment. His face was unreadable in the darkness. "Set your position on the western approach as ordered," he said quietly. "I'll factor your assessment into movement decisions." It wasn't agreement. It wasn't dismissal either. She moved to her assigned position. The western approach angle was a rocky shelf about 60 meters above the facility's main entrance, a good elevated position with clear sight lines down the access road and across the front face of the main building. Evelyn set up her rifle on a bipod, adjusted her position 3 times until the ground beneath her right elbow stopped transmitting vibration from a hairline crack in the rock, and settled in. From here she could see things Reed's eastern angle couldn't reach, including the gap between the main building and the generator shed, which was just wide enough for a person to pass through without being visible from the primary entry points. She watched it for 22 minutes. Nothing moved. Then something moved. It was brief. A shadow displacement. The kind of micro-movement that a camera would miss, but a trained eye, a patient eye, an eye that had been looking at the same frame for 22 consecutive minutes, would catch. Someone was in that gap. Not moving. Waiting. "Reed?" she said quietly into her radio. "Go ahead." "What's your coverage on the passage between the main structure and the generator shed?" A pause. "Negative. My eastern angle puts that passage in dead ground. I've got a stationary in there, not moving. Been still since I set up." Another pause. "A sentry that doesn't move isn't watching the perimeter. It's covering an interior position." "Or it's a trigger," Evelyn said. "Something to alert the inside of the building the moment we make contact." Reed's voice shifted slightly. A minimal change, but she caught it. The sound of someone updating their mental model of a situation. "Relaying to Cole," he said. Cole's response came back 90 seconds later. "Hold your positions. We're doing one final sweep of the northern approach before we push." And then the lights in the compound went out. All of them, simultaneously. Not a power failure. The administrative block had its own backup generator that she'd watched cycle twice during her observation period. The lights went out because someone turned them off. "Contact," Reed said, his voice sharp and flat. "I've got movement on the ridge above the east face. Multiple personnel. They're not our people." Then the first gunshot came. Not from inside the facility. From above it. From the ridge directly overlooking Cole's position in the tree line. The night exploded. Evelyn did not panic. This was the thing about her that most people couldn't understand until they'd seen it themselves. And most people never got that opportunity because they were too busy panicking themselves to notice someone nearby who wasn't. While the tree line to the east lit up with automatic fire and the radio dissolved into overlapping voices, Evelyn calmly assessed her new tactical reality. Ambush. Pre-positioned, multiple vectors. The shooter on the ridge above Cole's position had fired first, which meant suppression of command. Standard protocol for disrupting a military unit: eliminate or suppress the decision-maker immediately. She couldn't see Cole yet. Couldn't confirm his status. "Cole? Status," she said into the radio. Static. Then, "Pinned down. Taking fire from the ridge and the north tree. The transmission cut. Hale, status. 2 wounded. We're moving to the ravine." Hale's breathing was hard. "Cross, there's a shooter somewhere on the west side. Can't locate. My guys keep getting hit from..." Another burst of static. The west side. Her side. She reoriented her scope, pulling away from the facility entrance and sweeping the rocky outcroppings that flanked her elevated position. She was above the facility, but someone was above her, or angled to her from the north where the tree line met the rock face. She stopped breathing. Let her eyes soften, using peripheral vision rather than sharp focus, because peripheral vision detected movement better than center focus in low light. There, 40 meters north-northwest. A shape against the rock that was slightly wrong, not the organic irregularity of natural stone and ice, but the deliberate stillness of a person trying to look like rock. She moved her scope to the shape. A man, prone, long rifle. He was looking toward Hale's position, not toward her. He hadn't found her yet. She had maybe 3 seconds before he adjusted. She controlled her exhale, let her heartbeat drop through the breath. The world narrowed to the small circle of the reticle, the distance calculation that her mind performed automatically. 40 meters, near zero wind at this elevation, slight upward angle, the bullet would hit approximately 2 centimeters high of point of aim. She adjusted, pressed the trigger straight back. The shot broke clean. The shape against the rock stopped being a shape and became a problem that nobody would ever worry about again. In the sudden absence of fire from the western approach, Hale's voice came back on the radio. Clear. Urgent. That shot. Cross, was that you? West side shooter is down, she said. Get your wounded into the ravine. What's Cole's status? He's up. He took her round to the plate carrier, knocked the wind out of him. He's functional. Reed? I'm here. Reed's voice was clipped but steady. I've got the ridge shooter identified, but I can't get a clean angle. He's tucked into a natural parapet on the ridgeline. Every time I set up for the shot, he adjusts. He knows where I am. How? A pause that lasted exactly the length of a man realizing something he doesn't want to say out loud. He's been tracking me, Reed said, since before we made contact. He knows my position, which meant someone had told him. Cole? Evelyn said. Go ahead, Cross. The enemy shooter on your ridge is working from a fixed position that shouldn't give him visibility on Reed's angle unless someone provided our insertion coordinates. He was set before we arrived. He's been waiting. A long pause. I hear you, Cole said. Our route was compromised. Our positions were compromised. The only reason they hit the tree line and not my western position is... She stopped, because she'd just understood something that made the cold around her feel several degrees colder. The only reason her western position hadn't been pre-targeted was because whoever had provided their coordinates hadn't known she'd be there. The orders that placed her on the western approach had been a late change. Cole had adjusted the team's positioning during the final briefing, 40 minutes before insertion, switching her from an originally assigned interior support role to the western elevation. A last-minute change, a change that hadn't been in the original operation plan, which meant the leak had happened before that change. Whoever had sold them out didn't know Evelyn Cross was going to be on that ridge. She hadn't been included in the original intelligence package, because someone in the operation planning chain had looked at the team manifest, seen her name, seen her assignment, and decided she wasn't worth including in the data they sold. They had underestimated her, and that miscalculation had just handed her the only advantage she had. She pulled back from her position on the western shelf, moving quietly along the rocky spine of the ridge, and began to climb. Reed's voice came through the earpiece, strained now with the specific tension of a sniper who has been located and can't reposition without exposing himself. I've got 3 enemy firing positions bracketing me on the east ridge. If I move north, the middle position gets a clear shot. If I move south, the lower position catches me. I'm stuck. What's your distance to the ridgeline above you? Evelyn asked. 40, maybe 50 meters of open rock face, completely exposed. Can you suppress the upper position for 30 seconds? To what end? I'd have to stand up to get the angle and... Reed stopped. She could almost hear him recalculating. Where are you? Working on something, she said. 30 seconds. Cross, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking... 30 seconds, Reed. Call it when you're ready. A pause that stretched 3 full seconds. Copy, Reed said. On your mark. She was already moving. The eastern ridgeline above Reed's position was accessible from her western elevation via a connecting spine of granite that ran between the 2 high points like a bridge, mostly concealed from the facility below by a natural rock overhang. She hadn't known about this connection before tonight. She'd found it during the 40 minutes she'd spent on her western shelf, watching, studying the terrain around her the way she always did, because knowing your ground wasn't just a tactical preference for Evelyn Cross. It was the way she processed the world. The rock was slick with ice, and she moved on all fours for the last 15 meters, the rifle slung across her back, her gloves finding purchase in the cracks and roughness of the stone. When she reached the connecting point and could see the upper position Reed had described, a natural parapet formation with a clear shooter tucked behind it, she was approximately 25 meters away and 2 meters higher. Not a long shot. Almost too close. She unslung the rifle, pressed her body flat against the granite overhang, and found the position in her scope. "Ready?" she said quietly. A half-second pause. Then Reed opened up on the upper position, suppressing fire that was deliberately ineffective but impressively loud. The kind of controlled noise designed to make a man keep his head down. The enemy shooter at the parapet did what people do when someone is shooting at them. He pulled back from his exposed position and compressed himself against the stone, which put him exactly where Evelyn needed him to be. She fired twice. The parapet went quiet. "Upper position clear," she said. Reed's voice came back with a quality she hadn't heard from him before tonight. Something that wasn't quite shock, but was in the same neighborhood. "I've got the middle and lower positions repositioning," he said. "They're reacting to a threat from above. Cross, they have no idea where you are." "Good," she said. "Keep it that way." She was already moving again. Below, the battle was shifting in ways that the enemy hadn't planned for. Cole had gotten his wounded soldiers into the ravine and established a defensive perimeter. Hale was applying pressure dressings with practiced efficiency while simultaneously directing 2 able-bodied soldiers to cover the northern approach. Ortega had re-established the radio link to Falcon Base and was broadcasting their situation in the compressed, priority-coded language of a unit in contact that needed immediate support. Acknowledgement and timestamp, grid coordinates, nature of enemy force, medical status. But support was 40 minutes away at the absolute minimum. In a firefight, 40 minutes was 3 lifetimes. Cole's voice came through the team channel, controlled in the way that commanders who are genuinely frightened keep themselves controlled, by concentrating on the mechanical details. "Cross, I need your assessment of enemy strength. How many are we dealing with?" Evelyn had reached a new position on the eastern ridge's upper face, prone behind a natural frost heave of rock that gave her a view of the entire firefight below. She counted. 14 visible firing positions, she said. Estimate 2 to 4 personnel each. Some of those positions are likely single shooters with high rate of fire for density illusion. True count is probably 18 to 22. A long pause. "Against 12 of us," Cole said. Not a question, just absorbing it. 11 now, Hale said quietly. "Morales isn't going to make it to 40 minutes, Cole." Silence on the radio. Evelyn kept counting, kept studying the firing positions below. The pattern of their positions told her something. The enemy positions were concentrated on the eastern and northern sides, the natural approach angles. The western position had only the single shooter she'd already eliminated. The southern approach, near the generator shed, was almost completely uncovered, because they expected the team to push north, because the original plan had a northern breach as its primary assault route, which someone had told them. And now, with the team pinned in the eastern ravine and the northern approach denied, the enemy could tighten the bracket at their leisure. Unless. She looked at the generator shed, 140 meters southeast of her position on the upper ridge, studied the gap between the shed and the main building. The stationary shadow she'd observed during her original overwatch. It hadn't moved since the shooting started, which wasn't the behavior of a genuine defensive element. Genuine defenders moved, repositioned, communicated. This one waited. Like it was watching for a specific thing, like it was waiting to confirm that the team was fully committed to the northern escape route before performing a specific function. "Cole," she said, "go." The stationary element in the shed gap. It's not a sentry. What is it? She watched the shadow for 3 more seconds, long enough to see the way it was oriented. Not toward the tree line where Cole's people were, not toward the northern approach, but toward the team's original insertion point, toward the helicopter landing zone. "It's a trigger," she said. "The moment your team moves to extract, that position activates. I think it's a blocking element for the exfil route." Cole's silence lasted 4 seconds. "You're saying we're not just trapped here. You're saying the exit is covered too." "I'm saying someone planned this assuming your team would survive the initial ambush long enough to try to extract. They wanted you moving, not dead. Dead men can't be interrogated. Dead operations don't produce intelligence on the unit's methods and secondary contacts. They want to capture the whole team. They want to capture you," Evelyn said. "A commander-level prisoner from an elite unit. That's worth much more than bodies." Cole's breathing was audible for one moment before he locked it down. "Cross, what do you need?" "Time," she said. "And Reed." Reed's voice came in immediately. "I'm here. I need you to pin the 2 remaining ridge positions for 6 minutes. Hard suppression. Make them believe you're trying to break through to the north." "And you?" "I'm going south." Silence. Then Reed said something she didn't expect. "That's 140 meters of open ground between your position and the shed gap. Downhill, exposed, no cover." "I know." "You'd be in the open for approximately 45 seconds during the approach if you move at a run." "I know." "Cole," Reed said, and his voice had changed in a way that was difficult to categorize. "I'm requesting permission to cover Cross's approach route. I can suppress the facility roofline and reduce her exposure to the eastern firing positions." A pause. "Granted," Cole said. Then, "Cross." "Sir." "Make it count." She was already on her feet. The run began. 45 seconds. She had calculated 45 seconds of exposure. The actual time, when she was moving across that open ground with automatic fire stitching the stone around her from positions she couldn't do anything about, felt like 45 minutes. Reed's suppression was precise and constant. Controlled bursts across the facility roofline that kept heads down in the upper story windows without wasting ammunition on positions that didn't threaten her approach angle. Whatever else she thought about Jackson Reed before tonight, the man could shoot. He was giving her everything he had from that ridge. She hit the generator shed wall at a full sprint and went flat against it, breathing hard, her heart hammering in a way that she acknowledged, cataloged, and then deliberately set aside because it wasn't useful information right now. The shadow in the gap was 11 meters north. She could hear it now. A man. Breathing. The specific breathing of someone who is holding still and trying not to make sound, which is its own distinctive sound if you know what to listen for. She moved along the south face of the shed, reached the corner, and checked. The man in the gap was facing north, watching the tree line where Cole's people were pinned. He had not heard her. She had 3 options and about 4 seconds to choose between them. She chose the one that gave her the most information. She came around the corner fast and low, closed the gap before he could complete his turn, and put the muzzle of her rifle against the back of his neck with a force that communicated very clearly that this was not a negotiation. "Down," she said. "Now. Now." He went down. She had his weapon in 2 seconds, her knee in his back in 3, his wrist locked in a way that would break before he could fight it in 4. "Blocking element for the LZ," she said. "How many?" He said nothing. She increased the pressure on his wrist by a precise increment, not enough to break, enough to promise it. 4, he said, then, in heavily accented English, "At the LZ, 4 men." "What's the signal? When do they activate?" "When commander sees the unit move to extract." "The commander." She leaned forward. "The Phantom. He's here. On site, right now." The man's hesitation was its own answer. "He's inside the main building," she said. It wasn't a question. She was watching his body language confirm it. "Where inside?" No answer. She let go of his wrist, stepped back, and struck him precisely at the base of the skull with the butt of her rifle, hard enough to put him out, calibrated to avoid permanent damage. She'd learned the exact force from a field medicine course that most people in her unit skipped because it wasn't that kind of course. He folded. She zip-tied his wrists, ankles, and connected the two with his own bootlace and moved to the edge of the generator shed. Cole's voice came through. Cross. Update. LZ blocking element is 4 personnel. Enemy commander is inside the main building. I have a prisoner from the shed gap position. What's your status? Holding. Reed's suppression is buying us time, but we can't hold indefinitely. Morales is... A pause that said more than words could. We need a way out. Evelyn looked at the south face of the main building, 12 meters away. A service entrance. A single steel door, no window. The enemy's entire tactical focus was oriented north and east. Nobody was watching the south. I can create a breach, she said. Cross, there are at least 6 personnel inside that building. I know. You'd be going in solo. I know. The longest silence of the night. Then Cole said, and she would remember this for a very long time. Tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen. She told him. It took 30 seconds to describe a plan that shouldn't have worked on paper, in daylight, with a full team. She was going to do it alone, at night, in an active firefight. Reed, Cole said. Ready, Reed said immediately, on Cross's signal. A 3-second pause. Copy that, Reed said, and then, barely audible, in a voice that wasn't quite the same voice he'd been using all night, something quieter and more direct and more honest. Watch yourself in there. Evelyn moved to the service entrance. She tested the handle. It turned. She looked back once at the darkness of Black Ridge Mountain, at the gunfire that was still remaking the night into something jagged and terrible, at the forest that had been trying to warn them since the beginning. Then she opened the door and stepped inside. The darkness in the building swallowed her whole, and in the moment before her eyes adjusted, in the half-second of complete blindness inside the facility's main corridor, she heard a voice from the far end of the building, calm, male, the particular cadence of a man who had been expecting exactly this. Sergeant Cross. Her name. He knew her name. He'd been waiting for her specifically. The door clicked shut at her back. The hunter was inside the cage. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the phantom smiled. The corridor smelled like machine oil and old concrete, and something else underneath both of those. Something metallic and sharp that her brain identified before she consciously processed it. Blood. Recent. Not hers. Evelyn stood with her back against the wall beside the service door, letting her eyes pull detail from the darkness the way they'd been trained to do. The facility's main corridor ran approximately 30 meters east-west, with 2 branching passages she could see from her current position, one north, one at an angle she couldn't fully read yet. Emergency lighting had kicked in at some point during the firefight outside, casting the corridor in a dim red-orange glow that turned everything into silhouette and shadow. The voice had come from the eastern end. She hadn't moved toward it, because the first thing you learned about a man who called your name in a dark building was that he wanted you to move toward him. And the second thing you learned was that a man who wanted you to move toward him had already decided where he wanted you to stand when you got there. So she stayed where she was. You're not moving, the voice said. It wasn't a question. It carried a quality she couldn't immediately name. Not surprise, not frustration. Something closer to appreciation, which was somehow worse. Most people move toward a voice. It's a reflex. They can't help it. She said nothing. Outside, the firefight was still grinding. She could hear Reed's suppression fire on the ridge. The distinctive crack of his long rifle, measured and deliberate. A man spending ammunition like it was currency he'd counted carefully. She estimated 6 minutes before his position became untenable, regardless of skill. 6 minutes. I've been reading your file for 8 months, the voice said. It was moving now. Not toward her, parallel to her, on the other side of a partition wall that ran down the center of the eastern section. She could track it by sound. Male, medium build probably. His footsteps had the cadence of someone in their 40s who moved well, but not with the aggressive efficiency of a young soldier. Sergeant Evelyn Cross, originally assigned to the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, rotated out after the Kessler Pass incident, 3 years on a desk before your current unit picked you up. She moved north, keeping her back to the main corridor wall, angling toward the branching passage. Kessler Pass, she said, and her voice came out flat and even, the way she'd learned to keep it when she needed to give information to a threat without giving the threat the satisfaction of knowing it had landed. "You did your homework." "I do my homework on everyone." "Then you know I don't respond well to being waited for." A pause. Then something that might have been a sound of amusement, not quite a laugh, not quite not one. "You respond well to being underestimated," the voice said. "That's different, and considerably more interesting." She reached the northern branch and checked the angle. A short passage, maybe 10 meters, terminating in what appeared to be a former supervisor's office, the door hanging open. Interior was dark. She couldn't confirm it was clear without entering it, which she wasn't going to do. "Where are your people?" she asked. "The ones inside the building are otherwise occupied." That told her two things simultaneously. There were people inside the building, and they were not between her and the eastern end of the corridor. Otherwise occupied meant repositioning, or they were managing something she wasn't aware of yet. "The ones outside are handling your team," he continued. "I expect your Commander Cole is currently discussing surrender options with himself." "Cole doesn't surrender." "No," the voice agreed. "That's what makes this interesting. If he surrendered, I'd have what I wanted in 30 minutes. Because he won't, it becomes more complicated. And complexity is where people like you and me actually live, isn't it, Sergeant?" She moved east. She'd placed him now. The partition wall terminated approximately 15 meters from her position, and beyond it, the corridor opened into what the facility's original blueprints would have designated as the main processing floor. A large open space, multiple columns, machinery bases still bolted to the floor, even though the equipment itself was long gone. Excellent cover. Terrible for finding a single person who knew the space, and she didn't. She stopped at the edge of the partition wall and thought about that for exactly 4 seconds. "You said 8 months," she said, reading my file. "Correct. Our unit wasn't activated for this operation until 14 weeks ago." Silence. "So either you've been tracking this specific unit since before the operational assignment," she said, "or you've been tracking me specifically for a reason that predates the unit." The voice didn't respond immediately. She used the silence to move. 3 fast steps along the partition wall, then low through the threshold into the processing floor, immediately shifting left to put a column between herself and the center of the space. She pressed against the column's concrete base, roughly 60 centimeters square, enough to cover her completely if she stayed tight. The processing floor was approximately 20 meters by 30. She counted 6 columns in 2 rows. Emergency lighting threw irregular patches of orange across the floor, creating pools of visibility and darkness in an unpredictable pattern. She couldn't see him, but he spoke again, and his voice was closer than she expected. Not much more than 15 meters, slightly north of center. "You were at Kessler Pass," he said. "You were the only survivor of an 8-person reconnaissance element that walked into a prepared ambush. The official report attributed your survival to fortunate positioning." He paused. "I attributed it to something else." She didn't answer. "I've been looking for you specifically," he said, "because the person who planned the Kessler Pass ambush told me about a woman who shouldn't have survived it. A woman who moved in the dark like she'd been born in it, who didn't panic when the world came apart around her." Evelyn stayed against the column. Her jaw had tightened in a way she noticed and didn't do anything about. Kessler Pass. 3 years ago. A mountainside in the dark. 8 soldiers moving on what should have been a routine reconnaissance. And then nothing routine for the next 11 hours until she'd walked out of that mountain on her own, with frostbitten fingers and 3 cracked ribs, and a story she'd given to the debrief team in the flat, clinical language that debrief teams preferred, leaving out the 11 hours of decisions she'd made alone in the dark. The decisions that she never fully explained because some of what had happened in those 11 hours was not something she had clean language for yet. "The person who planned that ambush," she said carefully, "you're connected to that operation. The person who planned it works for me." She absorbed that. "And the person who leaked our route for this operation," she said, "that's also yours. I have resources in many places. You have someone inside our command structure." He didn't confirm or deny it, which was its own confirmation. She shifted position, moving to the next column east, using a patch of darkness between two orange pools of emergency lighting to cross the open floor without silhouette. Her boots were quiet on the concrete, not silent, but quiet, and the ambient noise of the firefight outside was covering a great deal. She was getting closer to his voice. He either knew it and didn't care, or he didn't know it and was less good at this than he presented himself to be. She suspected the former. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Direct. The kind of question that felt like weakness but was actually intelligence gathering. The answer would tell her not just his objective, but how he thought about that objective, and that was more useful than almost anything else. "A conversation," he said. "In good faith, without the rifle. That's not going to happen." "I know." Again, that almost sound of amusement. "I said it anyway because I want you to understand that I'm not trying to kill you. Everyone else out there tonight, I'm comfortable with various outcomes. You specifically, I'd prefer alive and whole." "Because of Kessler Pass." "Because of what you did after Kessler Pass, what you chose not to do." A pause. "You know what I'm talking about." And the thing was, she did. She didn't respond, but something shifted in her chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the thing she'd spent 3 years carrying without putting it down. A thing about Kessler Pass that wasn't in the debrief report. A thing she'd looked at from every angle she had and still wasn't sure she'd decided correctly. "You knew," he said. "Coming off that mountain, you knew who set up the ambush. You knew which level of command the order came from, and you made a choice." "I made a report," she said. "You made a limited report. You told them what happened. You didn't tell them how far up it went." She said nothing. "Because you weren't sure," he said. "Or because you were sure. And you knew that if you said it in a debrief room, the person you were accusing would know it came from you, and the next operation you walked into would have the same ending as Kessler Pass, except this time there wouldn't be a survivor." The accuracy of that landed somewhere between her ribs. She moved again. 2 columns now between her and the corridor entry, 1 column between her and where she estimated his voice was originating. "I know who set up Kessler Pass," he said, "and I think you do too. And I think the reason you're the only one who survived, the reason you moved off that mountain without making a sound and without being found, is because you were already operating on the assumption that the enemy wasn't the only threat you were navigating." Outside, Reed's rifle fired twice in quick succession, then went silent. Silence from a sniper who'd been in continuous fire for the last several minutes meant one of 2 things. Either he'd solved the ridge problem, or the ridge problem had solved him. Her earpiece crackled. "Cross." Reed's voice, tight but intact. "I'm down to my last 2 mags, and the middle position is trying to flank north. I can hold another 3 minutes, maximum." "Understood," she said quietly. "Also," Reed said, and there was something different in his voice now. A quality she'd heard in exactly 2 other people in her career, both of them in moments where they'd looked at something terrible and decided to say it anyway. Hale found something, on Morales. His vest radio. Someone was monitoring our team channel from inside the unit's own frequency allocation. She pressed her back against the column and stared at the darkness ahead of her. "Someone on the team," she said. "On the team or in the command structure that supports the team. Ortega is going through the transmission logs." Reed's voice dropped. "Cole knows. He's not happy." She bet he wasn't. 3 minutes, she said. "I need 3 minutes." "You've got it." A pause. "Don't get dead in there." She took her hand off the transmit switch and focused on the processing floor. "Your man on the inside," she said. "The frequency access." "I don't discuss operational details," the voice said. "You've been discussing operational details for the last 4 minutes. I've been discussing history. There's a difference." She moved. Not toward his voice. She went lateral, north across the processing floor, moving fast and low between 2 machinery bases that were bolted to the floor at roughly chest height on a prone position, using them as cover while she reached the northern wall. The northern wall had 2 things she'd clocked during her initial entry. A breaker panel, dead now because the main power was out, and a secondary emergency exit identical to the service door she'd come through on the south side. The exit wasn't what she was interested in. The breaker panel was. Not because she could restore power, she couldn't, but because in her 14 years of experience with industrial facilities repurposed for military use, the breaker panel was almost always physically adjacent to the facility's original communication junction box. Old copper wire telephone systems, the kind that were standard in industrial facilities built before wireless became ubiquitous, were hardwired into that junction. They didn't run on facility power. They ran on a dedicated low-voltage circuit that often survived long after the main systems died. She found it by feel, running her gloved fingers along the wall below the breaker panel. A metal box. Recessed. Unlocked because nobody had bothered to lock a phone junction box in a facility that was supposed to be abandoned. Inside, a standard 4-line analog terminal, circa 15 years ago, with a handset still resting in its cradle. She pulled out her earpiece, pressed it against the terminal's speaker, and used the one multi-tool she carried to bridge 2 specific contacts inside the junction box. She heard a carrier signal. Live line, which meant the facility had an active landline connection that bypassed the wireless communications being monitored and jammed by whatever system the Phantom's people were running outside. It also meant someone had maintained that line, recently, because abandoned facilities didn't have active carrier signals on their landline systems. Ortega, she said into her earpiece. Static. Then, Cross, go ahead. I need you to run a trace on an analog landline carrier signal originating from the Harlan facility. I'm sending you the junction identifier code now. She read the 4-digit code stamped on the terminal's internal housing. Find the other end of that line. A pause. Cross, that'll take however long it takes, she said. Get started. She put the handset back and moved away from the northern wall. The voice from the processing floor had gone quiet. He'd heard her conversation. Good. Let him recalibrate. The landline, he said, from a position that had shifted. He'd moved while she was at the junction box. He was closer now and slightly south. You found it faster than I expected. You maintained it, she said. Why? Because every facility I use, I build one system that doesn't depend on what I've brought with me. Redundancy. Or because you needed a line that could be monitored from outside this building by someone who wasn't physically present. Silence. The line was active before tonight, she said. Before this operation. You've been using it for ongoing communication. The other end of that line connects to someone who isn't in this building. She was building the picture as she spoke, thinking aloud in a way she usually only did alone, because thinking aloud was a vulnerability. It told the listener what you were figuring out in real time. But right now she needed him listening, needed him to understand that she was closing on him in a way that wasn't just physical. The person who leaked our insertion coordinates to you didn't use encrypted digital channels, she said. Too much risk of intercept with our signals intelligence assets active. They used an analog line, this one, a line that goes to a terminal somewhere in our support infrastructure, somewhere that looks like it belongs there. The silence from the processing floor had a different quality now, less controlled. That's a significant theory, he said. When Ortega traces the line, we'll know if I'm right. Your signals specialist is in a firefight. He's very good at doing 2 things at once. A pause, then, yes, I know. I've read his file too. She moved south again, angling across the processing floor, and she could see him now. Or rather, she could see the shape that was him, a dark mass against the emergency lighting, standing behind the last column in the eastern row with an ease that told her his hands were at his sides, not reaching for a weapon, not positioned for immediate attack. Standing, just standing, looking in the direction she'd last spoken from, not the direction she was actually approaching from. She stopped 8 meters away with a machinery base between them and brought her rifle up to a ready position. Don't move, she said. He didn't. He turned his head toward her, toward where she actually was, not where his eyes had been pointing. And even in the bad emergency lighting, she could see his face clearly enough for the first time. He was older than his voice had suggested, early 50s maybe, a face that had been weathered by altitude and weather and the kind of long-duration stress that left marks more honestly than age did. He wasn't the skeletal, theatrical figure that the military intelligence files described in their characterizations of the Phantom. Those characterizations had the quality of mythology that grows around a name that nobody can attach to a real person. He looked like a man, a specific tired man who had been doing something for a very long time and hadn't stopped yet. His hands were at his sides. "You're younger than your file says you should be," he said. "Files leave things out." "Yes," he agreed. "They do." 8 meters, clear line of sight. Her rifle was up, and she had the trigger at the edge of its breakpoint. Tactically, she was in a good position. Strategically, she was in a complicated one, because capturing a prisoner alone in an active combat situation with no ability to communicate his status to her team was not the same as capturing a prisoner with backup available. She needed to end the firefight outside before she could safely extract him, which meant she needed options she didn't currently have. "Your people outside," she said. "You can call them off." "I could." "Will you?" He studied her for a moment. The particular study of a man who was making a decision he'd been building toward for some time and was now at the moment of it. "My people outside have a third-party communication structure," he said, "meaning they don't respond to a direct order from me to stand down without a counter-authorization from a second party. A dead man's switch in reverse," she said, "a precaution against exactly this situation." He tilted his head slightly. "There's no version of tonight where I call them off unilaterally. If I could, I would have done it already." She stared at him. "You want out of this," she said. "Not a question." "I want a specific outcome," he said, "which has become complicated by the fact that your team is surviving better than I projected. Particularly you." "What's the second party for the counter-authorization?" He smiled. It wasn't the smile of a man who was winning. It was the smile of a man who had reached a place in a very long game where the next move wasn't something he could make alone. "Someone you know," he said. And then Ortega's voice came through her earpiece, thin and slightly breathless, with the particular quality of a man who has just confirmed something he was hoping wasn't true. "Cross, I've got the trace on the landline." She kept her eyes on the phantom. "Tell me," she said. "The other end of the line terminates at a secure communication terminal." A pause. "It's registered to an asset embedded in our Tier 1 command structure. The terminal is physically located in the mobile command post." The mobile command post. Their own command post. The mobile unit that had coordinated their insertion tonight. That had supplied their route, their timing, their team composition to the operational planning document. "Who's the registered user?" she said. A longer pause. "The terminal is registered under the credentials of the person who planned this mission," Ortega said. "The operation coordinator. The one who put this team together in the first place." She heard Cole's voice in the background of Ortega's transmission, a sharp, bitten-off sound. Not words. Just a sound a man makes when something he knew intellectually lands in his chest as a physical thing for the first time. The operation coordinator. The man who had selected this team, who had assigned their roles, who had placed Evelyn Cross on the western approach angle at the last minute, not knowing that the last-minute change would be the thing that left one position uncovered in the enemy's intelligence picture. Not knowing that the one person he'd underestimated enough to leave out of his original briefing document would be the person standing in this building right now with a rifle pointed at the man he'd been working for. She looked at the phantom across the 8 meters of dark processing floor. "The coordinator," she said. "His name is Garrison," the phantom said, and the way he said it, the weight of it, the lack of performance, told her he'd been waiting to say that name to someone for longer than just tonight. "Major Paul Garrison. He's been providing operational intelligence to my network for approximately 2 years. Why are you telling me this? Because Garrison's counter-authorization is the thing standing between your team dying outside and your team surviving tonight. And Garrison is in the mobile command post, which is approximately 9 kilometers from this building. And you want me to go get him? I want you to understand that the only version of tonight that ends with your people alive requires Garrison to transmit a stand-down authorization that he would never voluntarily send." He paused. "Unless someone applied the right kind of pressure." "The right kind," she said. "The kind that involves someone standing in front of him who knows exactly what he did and can prove it." She held the rifle steady. Her mind was working through the logic of it, the layers, the angles, the places where his version of events could be constructed to benefit him in ways that weren't immediately visible. "You're handing me Garrison," she said, "a man inside our own command structure, which means that the moment I confirm his involvement, the investigation into how your network operates goes through him. And anything that goes through Garrison, any intelligence he's provided, any networks he's identified, suddenly has a contamination problem. The investigation circles back to the source, and the source is him, not you." The Phantom said nothing. "You're burning your own asset to redirect the investigation," she said. "Garrison knows enough about your network to be dangerous to you, so you're giving us a fire to put out that conveniently burns him before he can give up anything useful about your operational structure." He was looking at her with an expression that she couldn't fully categorize in the dim light. "You're good at this," he said, and this time the appreciation in his voice had no performance in it at all, just a man acknowledging a fact. "I'm right," she said. "You're partially right. Which part am I wrong about?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Garrison doesn't just know about my network," he said. "Garrison built part of my network, the part that has been running operations specifically designed to eliminate units like yours. Kessler Pass wasn't an isolated incident. It was the third in a series of operations that Garrison coordinated from inside your command structure. Operations designed to look like mission failures caused by bad intelligence, when they were actually targeted destructions of specific reconnaissance and intelligence capabilities." She went very still. "How many units?" she said. He told her a number. She kept her face still. The number was not small. "Why?" she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "Because Garrison was being paid," he said simply. "Not ideology, not cause, money. A very large amount of money from interests that found the specific intelligence capabilities of your unit and the units before yours to be commercially inconvenient. Commercially. Resource extraction operations. Certain territories. Certain parties with significant financial interests in those territories not being subject to reconnaissance." He said it the way a man says something he finds slightly disgusting even as he says it. "I was one node in a larger structure, Sergeant. I am not the architect of what Garrison built." She kept the rifle where it was and thought. Outside, Reed fired twice more. The firefight had an exhausted quality to it now. Less intensity, but no less danger. When firefights went long and ammo ran low, the chances of stupid mistakes happening went up dramatically. "I can't go after Garrison," she said. "My team is outside." "I know." "You expect me to choose between securing you and supporting my people. I expect you to recognize that securing me is how you support your people. Long term." "Tell me the other option," she said. "There isn't one." "There's always one." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a possibility," he said slowly, "that I could provide the counter-authorization myself, bypass Garrison's requirement." "You said you couldn't." "I said I couldn't do it unilaterally. I could do it with the cooperation of someone who had specific access credentials that could substitute for Garrison's authorization in the system architecture." "What credentials?" "The operational coordinator's biometric code, which is embedded in a physical token." He paused. "Which Garrison carries on his person." "You want me to get the token from Garrison. I want you to understand that if you get the token from Garrison, bring it back to me. I can end the firefight outside in approximately 4 minutes. Your team walks out. My people stand down. Everyone who is still alive stays alive." "And you," she said. "What happens to you in that scenario?" He looked at her directly. "That's the part," he said, "that I'm leaving to your judgment." She studied him across the 8 meters of processing floor. The rifle was steady. Her judgment. A man who had been responsible for God knows how many operations, how many deaths, how many compromised missions, leaving his fate to her judgment in a dark building while her team bled outside. She had about 90 seconds to make a decision that she would spend a very long time examining afterward from every angle she had. Reed's voice came through. No words. Just a single click on the transmission. The signal they'd established 3 months ago in a different briefing for a different operation. The signal that meant, "I'm at the edge of what I have left." She made her decision. Don't move from this building, she said to the Phantom. Don't communicate with your people outside. Don't touch that landline. And in return? In return, when I come back, we have a different conversation about what happens next. She was already moving toward the service door. Cross, he said. She stopped. Garrison knows you survived Kessler Pass, he said. He's known for 3 years. He has a specific plan for what happens if you ever get close enough to be a problem. She didn't turn around. What kind of plan? The kind he already set in motion, the Phantom said, approximately 2 hours before your team inserted tonight. The service door opened. The cold hit her face like a physical thing, and somewhere in the 9 kilometers between this building and the mobile command post, Major Paul Garrison was doing something she couldn't see yet, with a plan she didn't have the shape of yet, in the darkness of the same mountain that had been trying to warn them all from the beginning. The cold outside the service door was a different animal than the cold she'd entered through. It had teeth now. Or maybe it had always had teeth and she was just noticing them, because the thing the Phantom had said was still sitting in her chest, undigested. Garrison knows you survived Kessler Pass. He has a specific plan. She pressed against the exterior wall of the facility's south face and did a 3-second assessment of what was in front of her. The firefight to the northeast had degraded into something irregular, bursts with longer gaps between them, which meant both sides were rationing. She could hear Hale's voice somewhere in the darkness of the ravine, sharp and directional, managing his people's fire discipline. The ridge above was quiet, which meant Reed had either solved the flanking problem or gone to ground so completely he wasn't transmitting. She keyed her radio twice. The return, one click, told her Reed was alive and listening. She keyed it once more. The question code, status. 2 clicks back, functional but limited. She moved south along the facility wall, away from the main engagement, toward the vehicle track that entered from the north side of the compound. The enemy's blocking element at the landing zone, 4 personnel, per her prisoner, was 9 kilometers away from the mobile command post. Getting to Garrison meant passing through or around those 4, accessing a vehicle, navigating mountain terrain in the dark, and doing all of it before the firefight at the facility crossed from managed containment into collapse. She estimated she had maybe 22 minutes. The vehicle track gave her the first piece of what she needed. One of the enemy's abandoned trucks, parked 40 meters north of the main building with its nose pointed toward the access road. Not staged for escape, as she'd noted during her original Overwatch, the enemy hadn't anticipated needing to run. The truck was a dark-colored utility vehicle, military-adjacent but not military-marked, the kind of deliberately unremarkable transport that showed up in bad places all over the world. Keys were in it. She sat in the driver's seat for exactly 4 seconds, asking herself if this was the decision she was actually making. Then she started the engine and drove. But the access road that fed into the Harlan facility was a single-lane mining track built 50 years ago for heavy vehicle access and not maintained since. In daylight, it would have been rough. In the dark, with no headlights, she drove on NVGs, the world rendered in flat green and gray. It was a sustained exercise in reading surface texture through a monocular image and trusting her instincts about where the road's edge was. She drove fast. Faster than was safe. Morales was dying in a ravine back there. She drove faster. Her earpiece crackled at the 2-kilometer mark. Cross, Cole's voice, low and controlled in the way of a man sitting on something very heavy. Ortega confirmed the trace. Garrison. I know, she said. I've been in contact with Falcon Base. I flagged Garrison's terminal, but they can't act on it without more than a trace log, she said. I know that too. A pause. What are you doing right now? Driving. Another pause, longer. Where? He said. Not quite a question. Garrison's at the mobile command post. I need the authorization token he's carrying. If I get it, the Phantom can terminate the engagement. The silence on Cole's end lasted 5 full seconds, which from a man like Cole was the equivalent of a longer man's 20. You left the Phantom alive and unrestrained in the facility, Cole said. I left him in the facility. He's not going anywhere. How do you know that? Because if he wanted to run, he'd have been gone before I found him. He's been running for 3 years, and he came here tonight to be found by this specific team. He's done running. Cole absorbed that. Cross. Garrison was read into our operational protocols. If he's been passing intelligence for 2 years, then he knows every extraction route, every contingency plan, every frequency allocation we'd use in a compromised operation, she said. I know. Which means going to the command post alone is the only option that doesn't require you to move your people, which you can't do right now. She hit a section of road that had been washed out on the right side and corrected the truck's drift one-handed, the rifle in her lap, NVGs giving her the surface 2 seconds before her wheels reached it. What do you need from me? Cole said. Keep the engagement stable for as long as you can, and get Reed to a position where he can support an approach to the LZ when I come back through. I'll have either Garrison or his token, possibly both. Possibly. It's a moving target. Cross said. His voice shifted. The plan Garrison set in motion before insertion. Do you know what it is yet? No. Neither do I. Which means it's already running and we don't know what to look for. She didn't respond to that because there was nothing useful to say. The unknown plan was a variable she couldn't solve from inside a moving truck on a dark mountain road. She could only move toward the things she could do something about and deal with the rest when it materialized. Keep your radio open, Cole said finally. Whatever you walk into, I want to hear it. Understood. She left the channel open and drove. The mobile command post was a reinforced communications vehicle set up in a natural depression 400 meters off the main mountain road, the kind of position that offered overhead concealment from aerial observation and enough distance from the primary engagement site to be off the immediate threat axis. Standard doctrine for a command post during a field operation. Standard doctrine had written it exactly where she expected it to be. She parked the truck 800 meters out and covered the remaining distance on foot, moving through the tree line along the depression's western lip until she could see the vehicle below. 2 external sentries, both on the northern and eastern sides, oriented toward the direction of the Harlan facility, toward the direction where threats were expected to come from. Not from the south, not from a woman in an enemy truck who'd approached from the facility itself. She studied the sentries for 90 seconds. They were alert but static, men who were monitoring a situation rather than actively responding to one, their body language carrying the specific tension of people who were waiting for news rather than managing an immediate threat. The vehicle's communications array was active. She could see the telltale flicker of monitor light through the rear window's blackout curtain, not fully sealed. Someone was inside working. She came down the western slope of the depression at an angle that kept her in the blind spot between the 2 sentries for the majority of the approach. The remaining 8 meters to the vehicle's rear door were open ground, but she timed it to the moment when both sentries were oriented toward a burst of distant fire from the direction of the facility and crossed. The rear door was locked from inside with a standard bar latch. She could hear the mechanism. She knocked, not aggressively. 3 measured knocks, the kind a person makes when they're expected. A pause. Movement inside. The latch lifted. The door opened 4 inches, and Major Paul Garrison looked out through the gap. He was 53, with the precise bearing of a career officer who had maintained his physical standards long after the operational urgency to do so had passed. The kind of discipline that was more about identity than fitness at this point. Silver at his temples. Eyes that were quick and calculating and had, right now, a specific quality. A man who had expected to see a friendly face and instead was seeing something that did not compute. She hit the door, hard, with her shoulder, full weight, throwing it inward. Garrison went back with it, stumbling, and she was through the door before it finished swinging, already putting herself between him and the vehicle's main console where a sidearm would most likely be within reach. He'd hit the communications rack and caught himself against it, his hand going for the holster at his hip before his mind had finished processing the sequence. "Don't," she said. Her rifle was up. He stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other inside the cramped, monitor-lit interior of the command vehicle, with the distant sound of the firefight bleeding through the vehicle's walls like weather through a badly insulated house. Garrison's expression went through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then something that settled into a face she hadn't expected. Not fear, not guilt. Contempt. "Sergeant Cross," he said. His voice was measured. The voice of a man who had decided in the time it took to recover from being hit by a door that he was going to manage this. "Garrison," she said, "hands on the console, both of them." He placed his hands on the console. "You drove here in one of their vehicles," he said, "which means you've been inside the facility, which means you spoke with him." "Hands flat," she said. "Stop talking." "He told you about me." "I said stop talking." "And you believed him." He tilted his head fractionally, the way a man does when he's making a performance of being reasonable. "Cross, think about what you're doing. You came here based on the word of a man who has been running operations that killed soldiers in this unit and units before it. You're going to compromise an active military command post based on intelligence from the enemy we were sent to capture." She kept the rifle where it was. "You're right that he told me about you," she said, "but I didn't come here based on his word. I came here based on a phone trace that Ortega ran on an active landline at the Harlan facility that terminated at your communications terminal." The contempt on his face shifted, just slightly. "A landline trace," he said. "That's circumstantial. The terminal log will show call frequency and duration. The timing will correlate with operational briefings you ran for the units that didn't make it back. That's not circumstantial." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were still flat on the console. "You're smarter than your file suggests," he said, and the quality of it, the way he said it, was different from how the Phantom had said the same general thing. The Phantom had said it like a man acknowledging something that mattered to him. Garrison said it like a man revising a risk calculation. "The token," she said. "The biometric authorization token you carry for the operational coordination system. Put it on the console." His eyes went to her face. "Who told you about that?" he said. "The console. Now." "Cross." He leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "You don't understand the full shape of what you've walked into tonight. The network I've been working with has components that go significantly beyond what your Phantom friend told you. If you extract me from this vehicle right now, if you disrupt what I'm in the middle of coordinating, there are automatic triggers that activate, contingencies that don't require me to take any action at all. The plan you set in motion before insertion," she said. He blinked. One slow blink. "He told you about that too," he said. "He told me it existed. He didn't know the shape of it." She watched his face. "But you just told me it's something you're currently coordinating, which means it's active right now, and you have some ongoing role in it." His hands were still on the console. His right index finger, she noticed, had moved approximately 2 centimeters toward the edge of the console surface, toward something. She came around the console in 2 steps, grabbed his right wrist, turned it, and put him face down on the console surface, with his arm locked behind him before he'd completed the movement. Under his right hand, where he'd been reaching, a recessed button, flush with the console surface, covered by a small protective cap that had been flipped open. A dead man's switch, in the literal sense. She looked at it. "What does that send?" she said. His face was pressed against the monitor surface. His breathing was controlled, too controlled, the specific control of a man who is managing pain and trying not to show it. "A signal," he said. "To what?" Silence. She increased the angle on his arm by 3 degrees. "A termination order," he said. "To the blocking element at your landing zone." "Termination of what?" "Of the extraction window." A pause that was exactly 1 beat too long. "And the people in it." She held the position. Outside, the distant firefight punctuated the silence. Cole had said the wounded were in the ravine. Morales was dying. At least 2 others were hit. When the engagement stabilized enough to extract, they would move to the LZ, where 4 personnel were waiting. Who would receive a termination order the moment Garrison's finger left a button he hadn't been able to press? "You were going to let them extract," she said. "Let them believe the engagement was over. Wait until they were at the LZ and then—" "It's not personal," he said. The flatness of it was worse than if he'd been angry. "Cole," she said into her open radio channel. Cole's voice came back immediately. "Here. Do not move to the LZ. Repeat, do not move to the LZ under any circumstances until I give you a specific clearance code. The blocking element there is armed with a termination order that activates on approach." A silence. "Copy," Cole said. His voice was very quiet. Understood. She looked down at Garrison. The token, she said. Last time. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, left breast pocket. Inside. She kept his arm locked, reached with her free hand and found it. A small rectangular device, roughly the size and weight of a thick credit card, with a biometric sensor pad on one face and a single status LED on the other, currently dark. She pulled it out and put it in her own pocket. Then she pulled him upright, turned him, and put him in the operator's chair with zip ties from her kit, securing his wrist to the chair's armrest brackets. She checked the button on the console. The protective cap was still up. She closed it, pressed it down until she heard the magnetic catch engage. Is there a manual override for the termination order if that signal isn't sent? She said. He looked at her. Garrison, if I walk out of here without you providing a stand down to the LZ element, those 4 personnel will be waiting at that LZ indefinitely. My team doesn't go near it. Nobody dies. But you also don't get whatever you were hoping to get from this operation tonight, because the moment I transmit your terminal logs to the Divisional Inspector General, this network is compromised regardless. She watched him calculate. There's no override, he said. The signal to the LZ element comes from me. The stand-down signal is a separate frequency, manually transmitted. Then transmit it. Why would I do that? Because your network is already burned, she said. The trace is done. The logs exist. The only negotiating position you have is what you choose to offer in the next 4 minutes before I walk out of this vehicle and turn everything I have over to people who will spend the next 3 years taking your network apart one piece at a time without making you any deals at all. He stared at her. You're not authorized to make deals, he said. No, she agreed. I'm not. But I'm the one standing here, and they're not. So what you get right now is the version that involves me, not the version that involves them. The silence stretched. Garrison looked at a woman he had left out of an intelligence briefing 14 weeks ago because he'd assessed her as secondary. A woman he had underestimated precisely enough for her to still be standing in front of him when everyone involved in tonight's operation had assumed she wouldn't be. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached forward within the limited range the zip ties permitted and keyed a frequency on the secondary communications panel. Delta 7, this is Coordinator. Stand down at current position. Acknowledge. A pause. Static. Then a voice. Acknowledged. Standing down. She listened to it, confirmed the transmission had gone through, and noted the frequency he'd used. The token, she said. Walk me through how it works. Biometric scan from the registered user overrides the secondary authorization requirement in the stand-down system. The Phantom knows how to use it. He built the architecture. He built the stand-down architecture. He built most of the coordination infrastructure, Garrison said. 2 years ago when he started again, when the arrangement was established. She filed away the hesitation. There was more in that stop-start than he'd intended to show. Who established it, she said. That's not a conversation for here. Garrison, there are people above me in this, he said. People who don't have their names on terminal logs, who don't make phone calls, who you will not find by looking at what I did or who I talked to. He looked at her directly. I'm not saying this to protect them. I'm saying this because you need to understand that burning me doesn't end what was built. It just removes one node. She stood with that for a moment. Is the Phantom one of those people? She said. Above you. No, Garrison said, and the certainty of it was the most honest thing he'd said. The Phantom is what you and I are. A tool with a conscience that eventually became a problem. She looked at him. He turned, she said. He was always going to turn. I knew it from the beginning. Some people can do this work and stay clean on the inside. He wasn't one of them. Garrison paused. Neither am I, for the record. I'm just better at delaying the reckoning. She took a breath. The plan you set in motion before insertion tonight, she said. The one still running. What is it? He looked at the floor. It wasn't a plan to kill your team, he said. It was a contingency in case tonight failed. A misdirection package. Pre-positioned intelligence reports, false ones, that would be automatically submitted to the Divisional Review Board if I didn't cancel them by 0300. Reports attributing what to whom. He was quiet. Garrison. Reports attributing the compromise of the Harlan operation to an internal source in your unit. He paused. Specifically to the unit's late edition sniper who was brought on 14 weeks ago with a compromised background history from the Kessler Pass incident. The air in the vehicle was very still. Me, she said. You, he said. A woman nobody in the command structure looked at closely enough to question. Whose assignment was last minute, whose presence was unusual, who, in the aftermath of a failed operation, would be the easiest person to frame because she was already peripheral to the unit's identity and nobody would fight very hard for her. She didn't move. 0300, she said. Hour and 40 minutes from now. And if you cancel it, I transmit a single code to the automated submission system. The package is deleted. The reports don't go anywhere. And Ortega's trace evidence and the terminal logs are enough without the false reports to build a real case. Yes, Garrison said quietly. They are. She looked at him. He was a man who had done something she couldn't fully catalog yet. The full scope of what he'd enabled, the operations that hadn't come back, the soldiers who'd died on mountains because he'd sold their routes to people who profited from their absence. She wasn't going to look away from that. She wasn't going to make it smaller by deciding his current cooperation changed the arithmetic. But she was also a woman with an hour and 40 minutes, and a team in a ravine, and a false intelligence package that would destroy what was left of her career and her name if it landed in the Divisional Review Board. Cancel it, she said. He reached forward again, slowly, within the range the zip ties permitted, and keyed a 6-digit code into the secondary panel. A status confirmation appeared on the monitor surface. Package deletion confirmed. 24733. She read it twice. Then she took a picture of it with the small documentation camera she carried in her kit. The same camera she'd used to photograph the boot print at waypoint Delta 4, which felt like a week ago now. Ortega, she said into her radio. Here. I need a military police contact and a secure transmission channel. I'm at the command post. I have Garrison. I have documentation. She looked at the cancel confirmation on the monitor. I need someone with appropriate authority to take custody of this location before anything else in it gets touched. A longer pause than she expected. Then Ortega's voice came back with something in it, a quality she recognized as a man trying to hold two things steady at once. Copy, Cross. One thing. A pause. Falcon Base is asking about Commander Cole. They lost his direct transmission about 12 minutes ago. They've been reaching out on secondary frequencies, but they're getting nothing. She went cold. Reed, she said immediately, what's Cole's status? Static. Then Reed's voice, and it had a quality in it she hadn't heard from him before tonight, something raw and poorly managed. That's the thing, Reed said. I've been trying to reach you. Cole went down about 8 minutes ago. A breath. He went forward of the ravine position to reposition one of the wounded and caught a round. Reed stopped. Started again. He's alive, but he's not conscious, and I don't know for how long. The command structure. Cole down. Command post occupied by the man she'd just zip-tied to a chair, which left the senior functional officer at the engagement site as, Reed, she said. Yeah, you're the senior functional. A silence. I know, Reed said. It came out rough. Can you hold the position? Yes. Morales. A pause that said everything. We need to move him in the next 20 minutes, or it doesn't matter, Reed said. His medic is doing everything she can, but she needs a surgical environment. 20 minutes. She looked at the token in her pocket, looked at Garrison in the chair, looked at the secondary communications panel with the stand-down confirmation still on the screen. She had the Phantom in the facility with the token that could terminate the engagement. She had Garrison secured with evidence that would survive a chain of custody challenge. She had a team in a ravine with wounded who needed extraction in 20 minutes and a landing zone that was theoretically clear but not confirmed. She had a lot of problems and one pair of hands. Reed, she said, I need you to do something. Name it. I'm going to transmit a code sequence to you. I need you to relay it verbally to Hale, and Hale relays it to the facility's main building. Not by radio. Hale needs to physically get someone to the building's south service door and say it through the door. A pause. You left someone in the building. Someone who can end this if I give him what he needs. Another pause, longer this time. Cross, the Phantom. Yes. The silence from Reed lasted 4 seconds. She could almost hear him doing the same calculation she'd done inside the facility. The layers, the angles, the places where something could go wrong. That's a significant call, he said. It is, she agreed. Cole's not available to authorize it. I know. I'm not sure I can authorize it either. You can't, she said. This one's on me. The silence stretched another 3 seconds. What's the code sequence? Reed said. She took the token out of her pocket and read the serial number off its back face, followed by a 4-digit operational identifier she'd had Garrison provide, along with the transmission instructions. Reed repeated it back to her without error. Hale will need to get to within shouting distance of the south service door, she said. The man inside will know what to do with it. Understood. And Reed? Yeah. When the engagement drops, when you hear it drop, move immediately. Get the wounded to the LZ. Don't wait to confirm. Don't wait for me. Get them moving the moment the fire stops. A pause. Where will you be? He said. Coming behind you, she said, with Garrison. She cut the transmission and looked at Major Paul Garrison, zip-tied to a chair in his own command vehicle, with the monitor light turning the planes of his face into something that looked, in this moment, very tired. Stand up, she said. He looked at her. You're bringing me with you, he said. That was always going to happen. He stood, with the limited range the zip ties allowed, and she cut the wrist restraints, not freeing him, but changing their configuration, securing his hands in front of him with a longer run of plastic that gave him enough movement to walk without being able to reach anything useful. She walked him to the rear door of the vehicle. Outside, the sentries were still at their positions. She'd deal with that in the next 30 seconds, and she already knew how. But before she opened the door, Garrison said something. Cross. She stopped. The people above me, he said. The ones without their names on anything. They'll know tonight failed by morning. They'll start looking for the next access point, the next Garrison. I know, she said. This doesn't end tonight. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, and his voice had lost the calculated quality entirely, stripped down to something older and more damaged. Kessler Pass. I pushed back on that one, for whatever that's worth. She looked at him. It's worth nothing, she said, and opened the door. That. 8 minutes later, on a mountain road 2 kilometers from the Harlan facility, Evelyn Cross heard the firefight stop. Not taper, not slow, stop. One moment, the mountain had been full of it. The specific acoustic texture of sustained small arms engagement, multi-directional, the sound of a situation that had no natural end in sight. And then, in the space of about 4 seconds, it fell away to nothing. Complete silence. The kind of silence that a forest makes when it's deciding whether or not to trust what just happened. She had Garrison's arm, and she was moving, and she didn't stop moving, but something in her chest released a tension she'd been carrying for the last 4 hours without fully accounting for it. A spring that had been wound tight since the moment she'd stepped off the helicopter and Reed had looked through her like she wasn't there. The radio crackled. Reed's voice. Engagement terminated. We're moving. LZ in 6 minutes. Then Hale. 4 wounded, 2 critical, moving now. Then, after a pause that held the specific weight of a man who had been carrying a position alone for the last 20 minutes and was now allowing himself to acknowledge it, Reed again, quieter than before. Good call, Cross. She didn't respond. She kept moving through the dark, Garrison ahead of her on the mountain road, the token in her pocket and the night beginning, very slowly, to show the first gray suggestion of something less than total darkness at the eastern horizon. Not dawn yet, not close, but the idea of it. The mountain was still around them. The trees were still dense and cold, and the road was still treacherous, and there were still things she didn't know the shape of. The people above Garrison, the network that would survive tonight, the questions that would take months or years to answer fully. But her team was moving, the wounded were moving. And Sergeant Evelyn Cross walked out of the dark with the man who'd tried to erase her, and behind her the mountain kept its own counsel, the way mountains always do. The LZ was a flat clearing 200 meters north of the access road, and by the time Evelyn arrived with Garrison, the helicopters were already inbound. She could hear them before she could see them, the distant thrum cutting through the pre-dawn silence like something urgent and necessary. Reed had moved fast. The wounded were already at the clearing's edge when she came through the tree line with Garrison ahead of her, and the first thing she saw was Hale, kneeling beside a stretcher, his hands pressing a wound pack against something she couldn't fully see. His face carrying the particular expression of a man who has been holding a situation together through willpower alone, and is now, in the presence of imminent rescue, allowing his body to acknowledge everything it's been carrying. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. His eyes went to Garrison, then back to her. He didn't say anything, just held her gaze for 2 seconds and then looked back down at what he was doing, which was, she understood, its own kind of statement. Ortega was at the clearing's northern edge with his satellite relay active, coordinating the inbound aircraft. He acknowledged her with a single nod when she passed, the nod of a man who had processed a great deal of information in the last hour and was still in the middle of processing it. She moved Garrison to the southern edge of the clearing and secured him to a tree with the remaining zip tie material from her kit. Not harshly, functionally. He sat against the tree without complaint. He looked, in the growing gray of pre-dawn, like a man who had finished something. Not in the sense of accomplishment, in the sense of exhaustion that comes when a long deception finally stops requiring maintenance. She left him there and went to find Reed. He was at the far end of the clearing, standing rather than kneeling, which told her his injuries, if any, were minor. He had his rifle slung across his back and his NVGs pushed up on his helmet, and he was watching the eastern horizon, where the first genuine light was beginning to separate the sky from the mountain. She stopped beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Cole," she said. "Medevac priority. He's stable, but he needs surgery." Reed paused. The round caught him in the shoulder, missed the plate by 2 inches. 2 inches the other way, and it misses him entirely. 2 inches the other way, and it goes through his neck, Reed said. So, she accepted that. "Morales," she said. Reed was quiet for exactly the right length of time. "They lost him 20 minutes ago," he said, "before we could move." She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. The horizon was getting lighter, a thin line of pale gray above the black mass of the mountains, the kind of light that didn't illuminate anything yet, but promised it was coming. "The Phantom," Reed said. "He's in the facility. Unrestrained." "Yes." Reed absorbed this. "You trust him to stay." "I trust that he wanted to be found tonight and he's been running for 3 years and he's tired," she said. "And I trust that he understands the only version of what comes next that has any value for him involves him being cooperative when the investigators arrive." "And if he ran anyway?" "Then he ran," she said. "And we have Garrison and the terminal logs and the landline trace and the authorization token and everything the network system architecture contains that Garrison doesn't know we have access to yet." Reed looked at her sideways. "You got into the network architecture." "Ortega got into it. I just told him where to look." Reed turned back to the horizon. The helicopters were audible now. More than one. The coordination suggesting a combined medevac and tactical recovery package. Someone at Falcon Base had pushed resources hard when Ortega's transmission started painting the picture of what tonight had actually been. "The debrief is going to be long," Reed said. "Very," she agreed. "They're going to ask questions about every decision made after you left the facility the first time, the call you made about the Phantom, going to Garrison alone, the stand-down coordination." He paused. "Using the token." "I know. Some of those are going to be hard to justify in a formal setting." "Some of them," she said, "I'm not sure I can justify. I made the calls I had to make with what I had." Reed nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, and stopped. She waited. "I should have," he started again. "On the insertion. When you flagged the boot print at Delta 4, the bird behavior. I should have listened harder instead of just relaying and moving on." She looked at the side of his face. "You relayed it," she said. "That's what mattered." "I thought you were being overly cautious. I thought—" He stopped again, let out a breath. I categorized you wrong from the beginning of this thing, and it almost got people killed. That's on me." She didn't tell him it was fine because it wasn't entirely fine, and he knew that, and telling him otherwise would have been a disservice to both of them. Instead, she said, "You adjusted." He looked at her. "When it counted," she said, "you adjusted." The first helicopter crested the ridgeline to the south, its searchlight beginning to probe the clearing. They moved apart, Evelyn back toward Garrison, Reed toward the landing coordination with Ortega, and the noise of the rotors swallowed everything that might have been said next, which was probably fine. Some things didn't need finishing out loud. The formal debrief began at 0900 in a secured conference room at Falcon Base, and it did not go smoothly. There were 4 people at the table when Evelyn walked in. A brigadier general named Thatch, who had the energy of a man who had been woken at 3 in the morning and had been making phone calls ever since. A woman from the inspector general's office named Vasquez, who was approximately 40 and had the specific stillness of someone who listened for a living. A JAG officer, whose name Evelyn didn't catch initially, and a man in civilian clothes who was introduced simply as Harmon and whose organizational affiliation was not specified. Evelyn had slept for 90 minutes on a cot in the base medical wing. She had been given a change of clothes and a meal she'd eaten half of. Her hands were still slightly stiff from the cold. She sat down. General Thatch opened a folder and looked at it for a moment before looking at her. "Sergeant Cross," he said, "I want to be direct with you about where we are. Last night's operation produced significant intelligence value and resulted in the capture of a high-value target and the detention of a compromised officer within our command structure. These are significant outcomes. They are also accompanied by a series of decisions made in the field that this inquiry needs to understand fully." "Understood, sir," she said. "You left a known enemy commander unrestrained and unguarded in an active operational site." "Yes, sir." "You accessed and disabled the mobile command post communication systems without authorization." "I secured the communications panel to prevent transmission of a termination order, sir. I didn't disable anything. The systems were functional when the military police arrived." Thatch looked at her over the folder. "You used an authorization token obtained from a detained officer to facilitate a stand-down by an enemy force." "Yes, sir." "None of those actions fall within your authorized operational parameters for last night's mission." "No, sir, they don't." Vasquez from the IG's office made a small note on her pad. She'd been making small notes since Evelyn sat down. "Walk me through the decision to leave the target unrestrained," Thatch said. Evelyn laid it out. Precise, sequential, with the specific language of a person who has been in debrief rooms before and knows that the quality of the account matters as much as its content. She described the Phantom's position, his stated willingness to remain, her assessment of his likely behavior, the time constraints, and the competing priorities that made leaving him in place the only option that didn't require her to abandon her team's immediate needs entirely. Thatch listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "And if he'd left?" "Then we'd be having a different conversation, sir. But we wouldn't be having it with less evidence than we currently have. The token, the terminal logs, the landline trace, and Garrison's cooperation give us a significant intelligence package regardless of the Phantom's physical status." "He's still in the facility," Vasquez said, and it was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was even and precise. Confirmed by the tactical recovery team at 0615, he was seated at the processing floor's eastern end. He had not moved. Thatch looked at Vasquez, then back at Evelyn. "He was waiting," Evelyn said. "Apparently," Thatch said, and his tone indicated that this fact was still giving him difficulty. Harmon, the civilian, spoke for the first time. His voice was measured and without regional accent, the kind of diction that was the product of careful practice. "Sergeant Cross, the Phantom communicated to you that there are principals above Major Garrison in the network structure, individuals without documentary exposure. Can you characterize what he told you about them?" "He told me they exist and that they operate without direct contact with operational nodes, like himself, or Garrison. He characterized Garrison and himself as, his words, tools with consciences that eventually became problems. Did he provide names? No. Organizational affiliations? No. He said the interests were financial, resource extraction in specific territories where our unit's reconnaissance capabilities were operationally inconvenient. Harmon wrote something on a pad of his own. And you believe he has more information about these principles that he withheld? Yes. Based on the fact that a man who built a network's coordination infrastructure and ran operations inside it for an extended period does not have zero information about who was paying for it. He gave me Garrison. He held back everything else. That's a calculated disclosure, not a complete one. Harmon and Vasquez exchanged a look that passed between them quickly enough that Thatch didn't catch it. Evelyn caught it. The Phantom's custodial interviews are already scheduled, Harmon said. The information he provides will determine the scope of what comes next. The information he's willing to provide, Evelyn said. Harmon looked at her. Correct. He'll negotiate, she said. He's been thinking about this for a while. He'll have a specific ask, probably related to what happens to him when the network's legal exposure is quantified. That's a standard dynamic in this kind of case, Harmon said, with the patient quality of a man who is used to explaining things he didn't need to explain. I'm not describing the dynamic, she said. I'm telling you that the negotiating position he takes is going to be built around something he hasn't given up yet, something more significant than Garrison. If you go into those interviews without understanding that, you'll trade too early. Harmon held her gaze. What makes you say that? He said. The way he talked about Garrison. He handed Garrison over without any apparent reluctance, and the reason he gave, that Garrison had become a liability, was plausible but incomplete. People don't give up operational assets that cleanly unless the asset's value has been superseded by something worth more. Worth more to him personally. Worth more as a negotiating piece, she said. Garrison was the opening bid. There's a second offer he's going to make when the time is right. The second offer is the thing that actually matters to him. The room was quiet for a moment. Thatch was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not hostility, not agreement exactly. Something more like a man revising a document he thought was finished. Your operational file, he said carefully, indicates you were moved to a desk assignment following the Kessler Pass incident 3 years ago due to a notation of, he consulted the folder, pattern of unilateral decision-making inconsistent with unit cohesion. She waited. I'm looking at last night, Thatch said, and I'm seeing a pattern of unilateral decision-making that produced better outcomes than the authorized plan would have, which creates a tension I'm going to need to think through carefully. The desk assignment was appropriate at the time, she said. He looked up from the folder. Why? Because I didn't explain my reasoning on Kessler Pass in a way that let my commander make informed decisions. I made calls without communicating what I was seeing. That's a failure, regardless of outcome. She paused. Last night I kept the radio open and gave Cole and Reed everything I had as I had it. That's a different situation. Cole went down before your approach to the command post, Thatch said. Reed was functional. I told him what I was doing. You told him after you'd already started doing it? Yes, sir. He looked at her. Kessler Pass, he said. The notation in your file also references information you possessed at the time of your debrief that was not included in your formal report. The room shifted slightly. Vasquez's pen stopped moving. Evelyn kept her face neutral. There were aspects of the Kessler Pass ambush that I couldn't attribute with sufficient certainty to include in a formal debrief, she said. Meaning you had a suspicion you couldn't prove. Meaning I had an assessment that pointed toward an uncomfortable conclusion, and I didn't feel I could act on it without risking being wrong about something that would have significant consequences for someone senior. Garrison, Vasquez said. Evelyn looked at her. You suspected Garrison after Kessler Pass, Vasquez said. It wasn't a question, exactly. It was the kind of statement that creates a space for confirmation. I suspected that the ambush at Kessler Pass had benefited from intelligence that could only have originated at the operational coordination level. I didn't have a specific name. I had a conclusion about what level of access the source must have had. But you didn't report that conclusion. I reported the facts of the ambush. I didn't report a speculative attribution to an unnamed officer in our command structure without evidence. 3 years, Vasquez said quietly. Between Kessler Pass and tonight, 3 years where Garrison's access continued. Evelyn held Vasquez's gaze. Yes, she said, and in those 3 years, 2 operations that didn't come back, Evelyn said. I know, I've read the reports. She stopped. I've read them a number of times. The silence in the room had a specific weight. Thatch closed his folder, opened it again. The gesture of a man who needed a moment. The soldiers lost in those operations, Vasquez said, not unkindly. You believe they might have survived if Garrison had been identified after Kessler Pass. I believe that's a possibility I live with, Evelyn said. Yes. The precision of that answer landed in the room and stayed there. Vasquez made no note. She just looked at Evelyn with the expression of someone who understands the weight of a thing and isn't going to diminish it by commenting. The decision not to report a speculative attribution without evidence, Harmon said carefully, is a defensible decision. It's the decision I made, Evelyn said. Defensible or not, it's mine. There are people, Harmon said, who would have reported the speculation and let the institution determine what to do with it. Yes, she said. There are. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a moment. Because the institution, at the level where the report would have landed, had a Garrison in it, she said. And I didn't know which one. So I made a choice that kept the speculation contained to me while I waited for a situation where I'd have something more than a guess. Harmon studied her. That's a very isolated way to operate, he said. Yes, she said. It is. Thatch leaned back in his chair. The chair made a sound. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was apparently something he did when he was deciding things. Last night's operation was a failure of planning and a qualified success in execution, he said. The planning failure is attributable to a compromised coordination structure. The execution outcome is attributable to... He stopped, looked at her. A series of decisions made by a person who was not supposed to be central to the operation and ended up holding the whole thing together. She said nothing. That's not a comfortable position for the institution to be in, he said, because it means the formal structure failed and an informal one succeeded, and that's hard to write a doctrine around. Sir, she said, I'd like to ask about Commander Cole's status. Thatch blinked at the subject shift. He's in surgery. Prognosis is good. He'll be offline for 6 to 8 weeks minimum. And the unit's operational status? Stand down pending this inquiry and the secondary investigation into Garrison's network. How long? Unknown. He looked at her. Why? Because Garrison told me the network survives him. The principals above him are still operational. The stand down gives them time to adjust, relocate assets, create distance from anything Garrison can identify. She paused. Every week the unit is offline is a week that structure uses to rebuild what we damaged last night. Thatch stared at her. You're not suggesting... He started. I'm observing, she said. What you do with it is above my pay grade. Harmon made a sound that might have been something close to a suppressed laugh. Vasquez was writing again. The debrief continued for another 2 hours and 40 minutes, covering the timeline in granular detail. The boot print, the bird's silence, the facility approach, the processing floor confrontation, the command post, the stand-down sequence, the recovery. She described each decision in the context of the information available at the time she made it, without reconstruction or retrospective justification. When she didn't have a clean reason for something she'd done, she said so. She said so 3 times. At 12:40, Thatch called a recess. The hallway outside the conference room was the kind of institutional corridor that existed in military facilities everywhere. Linoleum floors, overhead lighting that was too bright and slightly yellow, the smell of cleaned coffee from a break room somewhere nearby. Evelyn stood by a window that looked out over the base's central yard and drank water from a paper cup. Hale found her there. He looked like a man who had been processed through the medical wing and the initial tactical debrief in rapid succession, and had not had the opportunity to sit down between them. There was a fresh bandage on his left forearm where something had caught him during the firefight that she hadn't known about until now. He stood beside her at the window and looked out at the yard. Morales, she said. Yeah. How are your people? Mixed. He exhaled. Martinez is going to be okay. The round went through the muscle and she'll recover full function. Ewan's got a concussion and a busted eardrum. He'll be out a while. He paused. The others are... He stopped. You know how it is. She did. The inquiry, he said. Thatch's staff was asking me questions about the chain of command breakdown after Cole went down. Whether Reed was the appropriate person to assume functional command. Whether your actions at the command post were sanctioned. What did you tell them? I told them Reed was the senior functional and he made sound decisions under pressure. He paused. And I told them your actions at the command post produced the stand down that got our wounded to the LZ inside the window we needed. And that without that stand down, at least 2 more people in that ravine would be dead. She looked at him. That's accurate, she said. It's also not the whole picture, he said, and the honesty of it was the kind that cost something. I was the one who said, she belongs on this hunt, when Ewan asked. I was the one who put that in the air on the insertion flight. He looked at the yard. I spent this whole operation waiting for you to confirm my assessment, and instead you... He stopped. Instead, the assessment was wrong. Hale, I'm not looking for absolution. I'm saying it out loud because... He stopped again with the specific frustration of a man who is trying to say a true thing and finding that the language available to him is inadequate. Because someone should. She looked at the bandage on his arm. You had wounded in a ravine and you held that position, she said. That's what I know about you from last night. The rest is paperwork. He was quiet for a moment. Reed wants to talk to you, he said, when you're out of the inquiry. About what? He didn't say. Hale looked at her. He's been different since we came in, quieter, which with Reed is... He made a small gesture. Noticeable. She finished the water and folded the paper cup. Tell him I'll find him, she said. The afternoon session of the inquiry was shorter and more specific. Vasquez led it, with Thatch present but largely observing. She walked Evelyn through the Kessler Pass timeline in detail that went significantly beyond what the original debrief had covered. The 11 hours on the mountain, the specific decisions Evelyn had made about movement and concealment, and the route she'd taken to extract herself from the ambush zone. It was the first time Evelyn had described those 11 hours to anyone in anything approaching their actual detail. It was harder than she'd expected. Not emotionally, exactly. She'd processed it, or had done what passed for processing in a person who put things in specific internal containers and returned to them on a schedule that was partly deliberate and partly not. It was hard in the way that describing something precisely is always hard, because precision requires you to look at a thing directly, rather than in the peripheral way that allows you to function normally around it. She described the moment she understood the ambush was pre-positioned, the moment she understood what that meant about their operational security, the moment she made the decision not to attempt to regroup with the rest of her element because she'd calculated, correctly as it turned out, that any element she rejoined would become a target the moment her position was transmitted. She'd moved alone, and she hadn't transmitted until she was off the mountain. You went silent for 11 hours, Vasquez said. Your unit presumed you were dead. Yes. Was that a deliberate choice? Yes. Walk me through that decision. She did, precisely. The logic of it, the specific calculation that had led her to conclude that silence was safer than communication, the way she'd weighed the probability that their frequencies were being monitored against the need to update her command on her status. Vasquez listened. When Evelyn finished, Vasquez was quiet for a moment. The notation in your file, she said. Unilateral decision-making inconsistent with unit cohesion. The officer who wrote that notation. Colonel Patrick Wren, Evelyn said. He commanded the unit at the time. Colonel Wren retired 14 months ago, Vasquez said. He cited health reasons. Evelyn said nothing. He was also, Vasquez said, a character reference in Major Garrison's personnel file from 8 years ago. The room was very quiet. I didn't know that, Evelyn said. No, Vasquez said. You wouldn't have. She closed her folder. The notation is going to be reviewed as part of the Garrison investigation. I want you to know that. Evelyn looked at her. It won't bring anyone back, Evelyn said. No, Vasquez agreed. It won't. Thatch spoke up from his position at the side of the table. Cross, off the record. Evelyn waited. How are you doing? He said. Not as a procedural question, as a direct one. She thought about it honestly. I'm functional, she said. I'll finish being functional and then I'll find somewhere to sit down. He nodded once. The nod of a man who understood that answer because he'd given a version of it himself. The inquiry will take approximately 2 weeks to conclude formally, he said. During that time, you're on base, available for follow-up interviews. After that, he paused. We'll see where things stand. She understood that we'll see where things stand was carrying more than its literal meaning. It was carrying the weight of a conversation that hadn't happened yet about what happened to a sergeant whose operation had exposed a 2-year penetration of the command structure and whose file had a notation that was now under review. Yes, sir, she said. Bam. She found Reed in the base's outdoor range, unoccupied at this hour, sitting on a bench at the shooter's line with his rifle broken down on a cleaning mat in front of him. Not cleaning it, just sitting with the components arranged in front of him in the particular order that a person uses when they need something familiar to look at. She sat down on the other end of the bench. For a while, neither of them said anything. The base made its sounds around them. Distant vehicle movement, the mechanical noise of the facility, wind across the range's open ground. Morales used to clean his rifle the same way, Reed said. Components in a specific sequence. He said it was how his father taught him. She let that sit. I've been doing this for 11 years, Reed said. I've lost people before. It doesn't... He stopped. You'd think it would get cleaner. It doesn't get cleaner. No, she said. I keep going back to the 8 minutes, he said. Between Cole going down and your stand down. 8 minutes where I was the senior functional and I was pinned on a ridge, and I couldn't do anything to change what was happening to Morales. He put his hand flat on the cleaning mat beside the rifle components. 8 minutes where the actual situation was in a building 9 kilometers away, and the thing I was shooting at wasn't the thing that mattered. You held the position, she said. I know. That mattered. I know that too. He looked at his hand on the mat. I'm not saying I failed. I'm saying I understand now what the last 11 years of being the best shooter in the room actually cost me. I stopped looking at the other people in the room. She didn't respond to that. You saw it from the insertion flight, he said. The whole shape of what was wrong. The boot print. The birds. The facility. You saw it, and you kept saying it, and I kept relaying it, and moving on like it was data to log rather than... He stopped. Like it was you talking. Reed. He looked at her. You covered my approach to the Eastern Ridge, she said. You held suppression for exactly as long as I needed it. When I told you to relay the code to Hale, you did it without a full explanation. That's... She paused. That's not nothing. That's the minimum. Sometimes the minimum is what survives, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The inquiry, he said. They're going to look at the calls you made after Cole went down, the unilateral ones. I know. I'm going to tell them, he said, that the calls you made were the right ones given what you had, that the outcomes support the decisions. I'm going to say it clearly, and I'm going to put my name on it. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. He held her gaze. I'm doing it because it's true. And because I've been in this unit long enough to know that the people who tell the truth in debrief rooms are rarer than the people who tell the version that's easiest to defend. He paused. You told the truth in there today. I could see it in how they were reacting. The parts where you said you didn't have a clean reason, they weren't expecting that. It's what happened, she said. Most people find a clean reason retroactively. She looked at the rifle components on the mat. Kessler Pass, she said. After I came off the mountain, I spent a long time looking for a clean reason for why I stayed silent for 11 hours. I could have constructed one. I chose not to. Because the actual reason was that I didn't trust the communication structure. And saying that in a debrief room without evidence was going to damage things I couldn't repair, so I said I stayed silent for tactical reasons. And I let the notation stand and I waited. Reed was quiet. 3 years, he said. 3 years, she said. He didn't say the thing she expected him to say. The thing about how long that was, or how hard, or any of the available formulations that would have been well-intentioned and inadequate simultaneously. Instead, he just sat with it, which was, she'd learned, what actual respect looked like from a person who didn't perform it. The light on the range was going to gold. Late afternoon, the sun angling through a gap in the western ridgeline above the base, hitting the ground in long, parallel shadows. "The Phantom," Reed said. "What do you think he actually is?" She thought about it. "A man who built something and then had to live inside it long enough to understand what he'd built," she said, "and then had to figure out what to do with that understanding." "You sound almost—" "I don't sympathize with him," she said. "I understand the mechanism. Those are different things. The principles he mentioned, the ones above Garrison, they're the real operation," she said. "What happened last night is the edge of something larger. Garrison was a node. The Phantom was a node. Whatever's at the center of that network is still running." "Harmon," Reed said. "The civilian in the inquiry." She looked at him. "He's not IG," Reed said, "and he's not JAG. I ran into someone in the medical wing who recognized him. He's from a separate federal structure, the kind that doesn't have its name on its door." She filed that away. "Then last night was already bigger than Black Ridge," she said. "Probably was before we inserted," Reed said. They sat with that for a moment. The gold light moved across the range, slow and indifferent, the way light moved when it didn't know what it was illuminating. "One thing," Reed said. She waited. "That shot. The one that ended the ambush, when the whole firefight froze." He looked at her. "I've been shooting for 11 years and I have never in my life." He stopped, started again. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" She thought about how to answer that. "Kessler Pass," she said finally. 11 hours, alone. I had a lot of time to understand what I was actually capable of when there was nothing left to hold back for." Reed looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the first component of his rifle and began to reassemble it, slowly, in the sequence that Morales had used. It was the quietest kind of tribute available to a man sitting on a bench in the late afternoon. She stayed beside him until it was done. The inquiry took 11 days, not 2 weeks. On the morning of the 12th day, Vasquez came to find Evelyn in the small office the base had assigned her for the duration. A room with a desk, a window facing the motor pool, and a coffee maker that produced something that tasted like warm rust. Evelyn had been using the time to write her own account of events in the sequence she remembered them, not for the inquiry, which had its own documentation process, but for herself. The kind of writing you do when you need to understand what you lived through by putting it in order on a page. Vasquez knocked on the open door. "Walk with me," she said. They walked. The base in morning light looked different than it had on the night Evelyn arrived. Less urgent, more institutional, the kind of place that existed to support operations rather than to be one. They crossed the central yard and took a path along the base's western perimeter fence, where the mountains were visible above the tree line to the north. Black Ridge was up there somewhere, hidden behind nearer peaks. "The formal inquiry concluded yesterday evening," Vasquez said. "The report goes to the divisional commander today." "And the findings," Evelyn said. "The findings regarding your conduct are that the decisions you made on the night of the operation were outside your authorized parameters and produced outcomes that were necessary for the survival of your unit." Vasquez paused. "That's a careful sentence. It took 3 drafts. What does it mean practically?" "It means no disciplinary action. It also means no formal commendation, because the institution is uncomfortable writing a commendation for unauthorized decisions regardless of outcome." Evelyn nodded. "The notation in your file from Kessler Pass," Vasquez said. "Colonel Wren's notation. It's been removed and replaced with a corrected assessment pending the Garrison investigation's full conclusions." Evelyn kept walking. She didn't respond immediately. 3 years. The notation had been in her file for 3 years. It had moved her from an operational role to a desk. It had shaped the way every commander who pulled her file before assigning her to anything had read her. It had been, in the quiet and persistent way of bureaucratic damage, the thing that made her peripheral in every room she'd entered since Kessler Pass. Who authorized the removal? She said. Thatch, Vasquez said. With Harmon's concurrence. Harmon, she said. The federal structure that doesn't put its name on the door. Vasquez looked at her sideways. Reed talks. Reed observes. There's a difference. She paused. What does Harmon's concurrence mean for what comes next? It means, Vasquez said carefully, that there are people above the divisional level who are interested in the full shape of what Garrison's network represents, and that those people consider your understanding of that network structure to be operationally relevant. They want a debrief. They want more than a debrief, Vasquez said, but that's a conversation for another setting. She stopped walking. They were at the perimeter fence's northwestern corner, and through the chain link, the mountains were fully visible now. Snow on the upper elevations, the lower slopes dark with pine, the whole mass of it sitting in the morning light with the same indifference it had always had. Garrison entered a cooperation agreement yesterday, Vasquez said. Evelyn turned to look at her. He spent 3 days refusing. Then he asked for a specific condition. Vasquez paused. He asked that the cooperation agreement be negotiated with you present. Me. You. Vasquez held her gaze. He said you were the only person in the institutional structure he'd encountered who had told him the truth about his situation without performing it. He seemed to feel that was significant. Evelyn looked at the mountains. He wanted a witness he trusted, she said. That appears to be it. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an investigator. I have no authority in a cooperation negotiation. No, Vasquez said. But he didn't ask for authority. He asked for you. The cooperation negotiation took place in a secured room that was not the inquiry conference room. Smaller, fewer people. The kind of setting that communicated this is a working conversation rather than a formal proceeding. Vasquez was there. Harmon was there. A federal attorney whose name was Solis, with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this many times. And Garrison, with a public defender who looked young enough to still be processing where he'd ended up. And Evelyn. She sat against the wall, not at the table, an observer's position. She hadn't been given a briefing on what to say or not say, which she took to mean she was expected to use her judgment, which was either a sign of trust or a sign that nobody had thought carefully about it. Garrison came in last. He looked like he'd slept, which was more than she'd expected. He was in civilian clothes. The facility had his uniform, and without the insignia and the bearing of the command post, he looked like a man in his early 50s who had made specific choices over a long period of time and was now sitting with the cumulative weight of those choices in a way that didn't offer any relief. He sat down across from Solis and looked immediately at Evelyn. She held his gaze. He nodded once. A minimal nod. Acknowledgement, not gratitude. The distinction seemed important to both of them. Major Garrison, Solis said, we're here to discuss the terms of your cooperation agreement. You've indicated a willingness to provide full disclosure of your involvement in and knowledge of the network you've been operating within. Is that correct? Yes, Garrison said. You've also indicated you have information regarding principals above your level in that network. Yes. Before we discuss terms, you requested the presence of Sergeant Cross. She's here in an observer capacity. Do you have anything to say to her directly before we proceed? Garrison looked at Solis for a moment, then back at Evelyn. I want her to hear it, he said. Not as a proceeding, just... He stopped. I want her to hear it. Solis looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked at Evelyn. Evelyn said nothing, which was assent. Kessler Pass was the third operation I coordinated for the network, Garrison said. He was looking at the table as he spoke, not at her, which was the specific eye avoidance of a person who is making an account rather than performing one. The first two I told myself the intelligence I was providing went to parties who would use it to avoid conflict, reduce operational pressure in specific areas. That's what I was told, and I half believed it because I needed to half believe it. He paused. Kessler Pass disabused me of that, he said. 7 soldiers. I knew the element was 8 people. I was told one would survive, the one who was on the route they controlled. As a as a signal to me that they could protect people I designated. He looked up finally. I had designated no one. They chose the survivor to show me they could. They chose wrong. They chose you. The room was very quiet. You were supposed to be the leverage, he said. Instead, you walked off that mountain and I spent 3 years trying to manage what you might figure out. He paused. And then 14 weeks ago, I put you on a team I was already betraying because I thought... He stopped. Because I thought you were still peripheral. I thought the desk had taken whatever you had out of you. He looked at her. I was wrong, he said. You know that. I know that. I want you to hear me say it in a room where it becomes part of a record. She looked at him for a long moment. The 7 soldiers at Kessler Pass, she said. Their names. He looked confused for a moment. Say their names, she said. He understood. He said them. All 7. In the order she'd known them, which he'd reconstructed from the unit manifest, which meant he'd looked at it, which meant he'd known them as individuals in the administrative sense while he was deciding what to do with their lives. Saying their names out loud in a quiet room didn't change anything, but it made him look at each one, and that was not nothing. When he finished, Evelyn stood up from her chair against the wall. I don't have anything else, she said to Vasquez. She looked at Garrison one final time. Give them everything, she said. Not what you think is enough. Everything. She walked out. The Phantom's formal interviews concluded on the same day as Garrison's cooperation agreement. Evelyn was not present for them. She heard the summary from Harmon, who found her in the base cafeteria at noon and sat across from her with a cup of coffee he didn't drink and a folder he didn't open. He gave us 4 names, Harmon said. She looked at him. 4 principles. 3 of them are in sectors that explain the resource extraction interest. One of them is in a position that... He paused. One of them is in a position that explains how the network maintained operational security for as long as it did. Someone with intelligence oversight. I'm not going to confirm that specifically, Harmon said. I'm going to say that the investigation that follows from these 4 names is going to be significant and long, and is going to involve a level of institutional disruption that we haven't seen in some time. And the Phantom's negotiated outcome. He gave us 4 names and a complete operational history covering 31 months of network activity. Harmon held her gaze. He's going to a facility that doesn't appear on standard correctional registries. He's going to be there for a long time. And he's going to continue being useful to people who ask him the right questions. He paused. It's not justice in the clean sense. Nothing about this is justice in the clean sense, she said. No, he agreed. He picked up the coffee, looked at it, put it back down. He asked about you, Harmon said. Before the interviews concluded, he asked if you were still on the base. What did you tell him? I said yes. He didn't ask to speak with me. No, Harmon said. He just asked if you were here. He paused. I think he wanted to know the answer, not the conversation. She understood that. Some things you wanted confirmed from a distance. The knowing was enough. The talking would only complicate the shape of it. Cole came out of surgery on the 9th day and was transferred to a recovery room 2 corridors from the inquiry conference room, which meant Evelyn had passed his door several times before she knocked on it. She knocked on the 11th day. He was sitting up in the bed with a laptop open on a tray table and the expression of a man who had been told to rest and was resting as aggressively as possible by filling every available hour with reading. He closed the laptop when she came in. Cross, he said. Commander? Sit down, he said. You're making the room feel formal. She sat. He looked at her with the direct, uncluttered assessment that she'd noted in him from their first meeting in the facility's tree line. The assessment of a man who was trying to see something accurately rather than comfortably. I read the inquiry summary this morning, he said. All of it. She waited. The call you made about the Phantom, he said. Leaving him unrestrained. Yes, sir. I would not have made that call. I know. I would have been wrong not to make it, he said, based on outcome. But I want to be honest with you that in the same situation with the same information I had, I would have made a different decision. He paused. That's not criticism. That's me trying to understand what you were seeing that I wasn't. I was seeing someone who had already made his choice, she said. The running was over. He'd been running for 3 years, and he came back to a specific place on a specific night to be found by a specific kind of person, and all the evidence pointed to a man who had reached the end of something. Running people don't stage conversations in dark buildings. They just run. Cole absorbed that. Garrison's notation in your file, he said. Wren's notation. It's been removed. I know. I also know I brought you onto this team with that notation in your file, and I didn't examine it carefully enough. He looked at his hands on the laptop cover. I brought you on as a late addition because your technical file was exceptional, and I needed the capability. I didn't fight for your role on the team. I gave you the Western approach angle as an afterthought. She said nothing. That afterthought is why you were off the grid when the enemy's intelligence package was transmitted, he said. Your last-minute position change was the thing Garrison didn't know about, the thing that left you uncovered. He looked up. Which means the accidental decision I made, the one I barely thought about, was the hinge the whole night turned on. Sir, she said, you couldn't have known. No, he said, but I'd like to tell you that going forward, I'll know you, what you actually are, what you're actually capable of. He paused. If there's a going forward. She looked at him. Harmon, she said. Cole nodded. He came by yesterday. The kind of conversation that starts with general topics and ends with a specific proposal. The network investigation, she said. There's a unit being assembled, he said. Small, focused on the principles that Garrison and the Phantom identified. The kind of work that requires people who understand how compromised command structures operate from the inside. He held her gaze. He mentioned your name. She was quiet for a moment. He mentioned yours too, she said. Cole looked at the window. Outside, the mountains were visible on clear days, but today had a low overcast that put the peaks in cloud. 6 to 8 weeks before I'm operational, he said. That's the medical estimate. Harmon can wait 6 to 8 weeks. Cole looked at her, something in his face that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. The expression a man makes when he's discovered that a situation he thought was deteriorating has a direction he didn't expect. I'll think about it, he said. You've already decided, she said. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either, which told her everything. She stood to go. Cross, he said. She stopped. Morales, he said. The word carried everything that couldn't be organized into sentences. His family is in Tucson. I'm writing to them when I can hold a pen steadily enough. I wanted you to know. She nodded. Tell them he held the position, she said. Until the end. Tell them that mattered. She left before he could respond. Reed was at the range again when she found him, 2 days before she was scheduled to leave the base. This time he was actually shooting, slow, deliberate work at extended distance. The kind of practice that wasn't about performance, but about maintenance. Keeping a skill from deteriorating during a period when it wasn't being used operationally. She sat on the bench and watched. He fired 6 rounds over the course of about 10 minutes. She could see the target through the range's spotting scope, a standard silhouette at what she estimated was 600 meters. The 6 rounds made a pattern roughly the size of a playing card, slightly left of center. He came back to the bench and sat down. Left of center, she said. Wind's pushing from the right. I'm overcompensating. He set the rifle down. I've been overcompensating for a right push wind for about 3 years. I know I'm doing it. I haven't fixed it. She looked at him. Kessler Pass was a right push wind, he said. Figure of speech. I know. He was quiet for a moment. You're leaving. Day after tomorrow. Where? I don't know yet, she said, which was partly true. She had a meeting with Harmon in the morning that would clarify the shape of what came next. But even without knowing the specifics, she had a sense of direction that she hadn't had in 3 years. The sense of a person who knows what they're moving toward rather than what they're waiting for. The unit, Reed said, when Cole's back. Whatever Harmon's building. Possibly, she said. I put my name in, he said. Flat. No performance around it. She looked at him. Last night on the range, sitting here, he said. I thought about 11 years of being the best shooter in the room and what it had actually taught me, and what it hadn't. He picked up the rifle and looked down the barrel. The way people look at things when they're thinking about something other than the object in front of them. I think I've been doing this work in one dimension. I think there are dimensions I've been skipping. You're a good operator, she said. I'm a good shooter, he said. Those overlap, but they're not the same. He set the rifle back down. You work in more dimensions than anyone I've shared a radio channel with. I want to understand how that works, from closer up. She considered him. It's not something I can teach, she said. I'm not asking to be taught. I'm asking to be in proximity to someone who does it. He looked at her. There's a difference. She thought about that. I'll tell Harmon you put your name in, she said. He nodded. That was enough. She stood up from the bench and looked north toward where the mountains were beginning to emerge from the afternoon's overcast, the clouds breaking apart and the peaks coming through in pieces. White summit, dark flank, the particular combination of cold and distance that made them look like they belonged to a different and less complicated world. One thing, Reed said. She waited. That first night. The insertion. When you said the forest was watching us. He paused. How did you know? I didn't know, she said. I noticed. What's the difference? Knowing is a conclusion, she said. Noticing is just paying attention before you've decided what it means. He sat with that. She left him on the bench with the mountains behind him and the target at 600 meters that he'd been shooting left on for 3 years, and she thought that he would probably fix the overcompensation now. Not because she'd pointed it out, because he'd said it out loud. And sometimes, that was all it took. The morning she left the base, she went to the memorial board in the base's main corridor. It was a standard installation. Photographs, names, dates, the formal language that institutions use to mark losses. Morales was already there. A photograph that showed him laughing, which was the right choice, because laughing was apparently something he did easily and often, and she hadn't known that while he was alive. She stood in front of it for a while. Not long, long enough. Then she picked up her bag and walked out into a morning that was clear and cold, with the mountains visible in every direction and the sky above them a blue so deep it was almost implausible. The kind of color that showed up on days when the atmosphere had been washed clean by weather and what you were seeing was the actual sky rather than the filtered version. The vehicle that was taking her to the airfield was waiting. She put her bag in and got in. As it drove out through the base's main gate, she didn't look back at the mountains. She'd spent enough time looking at them. She knew what they looked like. She knew what they sounded like when they went quiet in a way that meant something was wrong. She knew what it felt like to navigate them alone, in the dark, with nothing but the specific kind of attention that develops in a person who has learned, the hard way, on a cold mountain over 11 hours, that the world gives you information constantly, and the only question is whether you're willing to slow down enough to receive it. The investigation ahead was going to be long. The network Garrison and the Phantom had described was not a thing that collapsed overnight. The 4 names Harmon had in his folder pointed toward people who had resources and patience and the kind of structural insulation that took time and precise work to penetrate. She was going to be patient. She was going to be precise. And she was going to do it in the way she'd always done things, quietly, carefully, from a position that people with poor judgment would continue to underestimate, because the world had a consistent habit of looking at small and quiet and deciding those words meant safe. They didn't. They never had. The airfield appeared ahead, and the mountains fell behind, and Sergeant Evelyn Cross rode into the clear morning with the particular stillness of a person who had finished one thing and was already inside the beginning of the next. She didn't need anyone to see her. She only needed to see clearly. The most dangerous people in the world are not the ones who announce themselves. They are the ones who wait and watch and act only when it counts. And by the time anyone looks, the work is already done.